I am Clara, 34 years old, and 1 year ago my husband walked out on our marriage to build a family with my best friend. He left me because a doctor declared me infertile. Yesterday I ran into them at an exclusive hospital. He smirked and announced to a room full of people that dumping a useless woman was his greatest victory. I simply smiled back. 1 minute later, the man who actually fathered that child walked through the doors, and the absolute panic on the face of my former best friend was a masterpiece. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated your worth and tried to destroy your life. It was a brisk Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. I was standing in the immaculate marble-floored lobby of the Lakeshore Executive Medical Center. This was not a regular hospital. It was a highly exclusive facility catering to the ultra-wealthy, a place where privacy and prestige were paramount. I was there in my professional capacity as the founder and director of a premier marketing firm. My agency had recently partnered with a top-tier venture capital group, and I was personally escorting our newest high-net-worth client, Richard, on a comprehensive tour of the facilities we were preparing to rebrand. I wore a tailored emerald green suit, my posture perfectly straight, my mind entirely focused on securing a multi-million account for my business. We had just stepped off the VIP elevator when I heard a voice that made the air in my lungs momentarily freeze. It was a sound I had spent the last 365 days trying to permanently scrub from my memory. Clara, well, what a tragic surprise. I turned slowly, maintaining the professional smile I had perfected over the past year. Standing 10 feet away was Logan, my ex-husband. He was 37, wearing his signature custom navy suit, exuding that same arrogant charm that had once fooled me into marrying him. Next to him stood Naomi, my former best friend, the woman who had held my hand and wiped my tears when I received my devastating infertility diagnosis, only to sneak into my marital bed the very same week. Naomi was holding a baby boy, Lucas. He was 1 year old, dressed in ridiculously expensive designer infant clothes. He was the child Logan had always demanded, the living, breathing symbol of his precious family legacy. The legacy he claimed I was biologically incapable of giving him. I felt Richard, my client, pause beside me, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. I took a deep, steadying breath. I did not flinch. I did not avert my gaze. I looked directly into the eyes of Logan with chilling composure. "Hello, Logan. Naomi. I hope you are having a pleasant morning." I kept my tone perfectly even, sounding as though I were greeting a mild acquaintance at a grocery store, rather than the two people who had conspired to shatter my existence. Logan stepped forward, positioning himself to block my path to the exit. His eyes darted to Richard, calculating the situation. Logan worked in high-stakes finance, and his entire ego was built on dominating absolutely every single room he entered. Seeing me looking successful, accompanied by a wealthy client, clearly triggered his deep-seated need to humiliate me. He wanted to assert his superiority. He desperately needed to remind me of my supposedly inferior place. "I am having a fantastic morning," Clara, Logan said, intentionally raising his voice so the nurses at the reception desk and the other affluent guests in the expansive lobby would hear him clearly. "Actually, I am having a fantastic year. I was just telling Naomi how incredibly lucky we are. Looking at you right now just reinforces it." Richard cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden hostility. "Clara, is there a problem here?" "No problem at all, Richard," I replied smoothly. "Just someone from my distant past." Logan let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed off the marble walls. "Someone from your past? That is a cute way to put it. I am the man who finally realized his worth and stopped wasting time on a broken investment." He gestured dramatically toward Naomi and the baby. "Look at this, Clara. This is a real family. This is what real success looks like. Leaving a useless, infertile woman like you was the absolute best financial and personal victory of my entire life." The lobby went dead silent. A few people gasped aloud. Naomi shifted uncomfortably, adjusting her tight grip on little Lucas. Even she seemed to realize Logan was pushing the ultimate boundary of public decency, but she said nothing to stop him. She just stood there wearing a faint, triumphant smirk, deeply enjoying the spectacle of my public degradation. Logan took another step closer, lowering his voice, just enough to make his hateful words feel like a physical strike against my chest. You could not give me a son. You could not give me a legacy. You were completely empty inside. Now look at you playing dress up in a nice green suit, pretending to be important while I have everything you could never provide. I am holding my future, and you are holding nothing. A year ago, those words would have broken me completely. I would have collapsed into tears, validating his cruel narrative. But I was not that weak woman anymore. I had spent 12 months transforming my grief into a powerful weapon. I looked at the baby. He was beautiful, but he looked absolutely nothing like Logan. I let a slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. "Enjoy your perfect victory, Logan," I said with absolute chilling calm. "Because false legacies shatter when you expose the truth." Logan furrowed his brow, his confident sneer faltering for just a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" he snapped. His voice had lost its theatrical boom, suddenly tight with genuine irritation. "You always did this, Clara. You always tried to sound smarter than everyone else when you were cornered. It is pathetic." I did not break eye contact. I let the silence stretch between us, allowing my absolute lack of intimidation to unsettle him further. Then I shifted my gaze from his red, angry face down to the little boy resting against Naomi. The child was looking around the bright lobby, entirely innocent, possessing thick dark curls and deep striking brown eyes. I looked back up at my ex-husband. "I am simply asking a question, Logan. You are a man of numbers, a man of finance who claims to calculate every single risk. Yet you look at this child and see only your own reflection. Tell me, are you entirely certain that little boy shares your exceptional genetics? Have you ever actually looked at him? Truly looked at the shape of his eyes, the texture of his hair, the tone of his skin? Or were you too desperate to prove your own masculinity to ask the most basic logical questions?" Logan scoffed loudly, attempting to project dominance, but his posture grew rigid. "Are you really trying to imply that my son is not mine? That is a pathetic, desperate move, Clara. Even for a barren woman like you, stooping to insult a baby is a new low." "I am not insulting the baby," I replied, my voice smooth as glass. "The baby is beautiful. I am merely questioning the absolute blind arrogance of the man holding the birth certificate." I shifted my attention entirely to Naomi. She had been unnaturally quiet. The smug, triumphant smirk she wore just moments ago had completely vanished. Her face was draining of color, turning an ashy, sickly shade of pale. She pulled Lucas closer to her chest, her knuckles turning white from the force of her grip. "Naomi," I said, tilting my head slightly, "you have been awfully quiet. You were always so talkative when we were best friends. You had so much advice to give me about my marriage, about my medical appointments, about my husband. Do you have any advice for Logan right now? Perhaps a recommendation on a good private laboratory for a standard genetic screening?" Naomi opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward the bank of elevators behind me. She looked like a trapped animal. The psychological weight of my calm demeanor was actively crushing her. "Shut up!" Clara, Logan growled, stepping slightly in front of Naomi as if shielding his prized possessions. "You are just jealous. You are bitter and spinning pathetic lies because you have absolutely nothing else." Right on cue, the polished steel doors of the VIP elevator behind me chimed with a soft melodic tone. The heavy doors slid open. I watched Naomi look past my shoulder. Her eyes widened in absolute, unfiltered terror. A man stepped out into the lobby. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and possessed an undeniable commanding presence. He was a striking African-American man wearing a charcoal bespoke suit that fit him immaculately. This was Damon. He was Naomi's former lover, a man she had kept tangled in her web of lies, a man whose fierce pride and imposing stature demanded immediate attention. He scanned the expansive lobby with sharp, calculating eyes until his gaze locked directly onto Naomi. Naomi trembled visibly. Her breathing hitched. Her hands shook with such violent force that she lost her grip entirely. The heavy, expensive glass baby bottle slipped from her fingers. It hit the solid marble floor with a sharp, explosive crack that echoed sharply across the quiet, luxurious reception area. The glass shattered into dozens of jagged pieces. Warm white formula splattered across the polished stone, splashing onto the toe of Logan's custom leather shoes. The loud noise made several nurses jump. Logan looked down at the mess, his face twisting in sudden annoyance and confusion. "Naomi, what is wrong with you?" he snapped, brushing the drops of milk from his expensive trousers. Naomi did not answer. She could not even look at him. She remained entirely frozen, staring in sheer panic at Damon as he began walking slowly and deliberately across the lobby toward us. The tension in the air skyrocketed, becoming so thick and suffocating that it felt difficult to breathe. Damon did not look at Logan. He did not look at me. His intense, unyielding gaze was fixed firmly on the little boy Naomi was clutching like a shield. The physical resemblance between the imposing man walking toward us and the one-year-old child was undeniable to anyone who dared to actually look closely. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I had planted the seed. I had set the stage. The destruction of Logan's false reality was no longer my job. It was an inevitable chain reaction that was already unfolding beautifully. I turned gracefully to Richard, my client, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. "I apologize for the interruption, Richard," I said, my professional tone completely restored. "As I mentioned, we leave the toxic assets in the past where they belong. Shall we proceed to the boardroom? The executive team is waiting for our presentation." Richard blinked, recovering his composure, and nodded quickly. "Yes, absolutely, Clara. Let us go." I did not look back at Logan or Naomi. I did not need to. I turned on my heel and walked away. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels on the marble floor sounded like a ticking clock counting down to a massive explosion. Behind me, I heard Damon's deep, resonant voice call out Naomi's name. I heard Logan ask, demanding to know who this man was. I walked toward the glass doors of the boardroom, knowing exactly what I had left behind in that lobby. I had left Logan with a shattered bottle, a terrified partner, and a devastating, inescapable seed of absolute paranoia that would quickly consume his mind, his marriage, and his entire fraudulent life forever. I took my seat at the head of the polished oak table in the boardroom. Richard sat to my right, unfolding the proposal documents, while the venture capital executives murmured in approval at the aggressive financial projections I had laid out before them. Outwardly, I was the absolute picture of modern corporate dominance. I projected unwavering confidence, nodding at the right intervals and directing the conversation with practiced ease. Inwardly, however, the adrenaline from the lobby encounter sent my mind spiraling violently backward. 3 years ago, I did not have this impenetrable armor. 3 years ago, I was sitting at the kitchen island of the sprawling Connecticut estate Logan and I had purchased, staring at a beige manila folder that felt heavier than an anvil. Logan had tossed that folder onto the marble countertop with the casual indifference of a man discarding a piece of junk mail. He did not sit down. He stood over me, adjusting his expensive tie, his face devoid of any warmth or affection. "Read it, Clara," he had commanded, his voice sterile and businesslike. My hands shook as I opened the file. It bore the letterhead of an elite fertility clinic in downtown Chicago. The bold black letters stamped across the top page delivered a brutal, undeniable verdict. Premature ovarian failure. 0% chance of natural conception. Inviable for in vitro fertilization. I felt the air evacuate my lungs. I looked up at Logan, my eyes swimming with hot, desperate tears, hoping my husband would pull me into his arms and tell me we would find another way. We could adopt. We could seek second opinions. We could build a beautiful life, just the two of us. Instead, Logan looked at his expensive watch. "I have a meeting with my wealth management team in an hour," he said, his tone chillingly pragmatic. "We need to finalize the divorce paperwork quickly, Clara. I am not trying to be cruel, but you understand the reality of my situation. My family has a highly structured trust fund. The bylaws explicitly dictate that the principal inheritance transfers only to a biological male heir. A biological legacy, Clara. You are biologically incapable of giving me that legacy. I gasped, clutching the cold edge of the countertop. Logan, we promised each other for better or worse. You cannot just discard me because of a medical condition. It is not just a condition, Clara. It is a breach of contract, he replied, crossing his arms. I need a son. I need an heir to secure my financial future and maintain my status in my firm. You are empty. Staying married to you is a terrible investment. My lawyers will send over a generous settlement offer tomorrow morning. Sign it quickly and we can keep this clean. Do not fight me, or I will make sure you leave with absolutely nothing. He walked out the front door without looking back. He left me sobbing on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the shattered pieces of the life I thought we were building together. Less than an hour later, Naomi burst through the front door. She had a key. I thought she was there because she was my best friend, the woman who had stood beside me as my maid of honor. I collapsed into her arms, weeping uncontrollably, handing her the medical file. Naomi stroked my hair, making soothing noises, playing the role of the ultimate comfort provider. But looking back, I realized her embrace was entirely hollow. Her comforting words were precision-guided missiles designed to destroy whatever remaining self-worth I possessed. Clara, you have to look at this logically, Naomi whispered, pouring me a glass of wine I could barely hold. Logan is a powerful man in the financial sector. Men like him require a certain type of family structure. You love him, right? If you truly love him, you need to let him go so he can fulfill his destiny. You cannot selfishly chain him to a barren marriage. I cried harder, leaning on her shoulder. But I love him, Naomi. I thought I was enough. You are enough for a normal guy, she cooed, gently rubbing my back while slowly tightening the psychological screws. But Logan is not a normal guy. He needs a biological heir to access his family trust. You holding him back will only make him resent you. Sign the papers, Clara. Walk away with dignity. Do not make him hate you by dragging this out in court. You need to accept that you are flawed and let him find a complete woman. I was completely blinded by grief and misplaced trust. I absorbed her toxic gaslighting like a sponge. I believed I was defective. I believed I was a useless, broken burden holding a great man back from his glorious potential. I could still vividly recall the sting of the pen in my hand as I signed those divorce papers. I surrendered the Connecticut estate, the joint investment accounts, and my dignity, entirely convinced by Naomi that walking away quietly was my only remaining act of love. I did not notice the heavy, distinct scent of sandalwood and bergamot clinging to Naomi's sweater. It was Logan's custom-blended cologne. I did not notice the subtle, expensive diamond tennis bracelet sparkling on her wrist, a piece from the exact same luxury jeweler Logan frequented. I did not question how Naomi knew exactly what Logan wanted, or how quickly she had arrived at my house after he walked out. While I spent my nights agonizing over my supposed infertility, barely able to eat or sleep, Naomi was spending her nights tangled in the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets of Logan's new penthouse. She was comforting me by day and sleeping with my husband by night, actively manipulating me into signing away my marital assets without a fight. They played me perfectly. Logan used my devastation to secure a rapid, uncontested divorce, keeping the lion's share of his wealth and the lucrative real estate portfolio intact. Naomi secured her place as the fertile, supportive savior who swooped in to rescue the poor, deprived millionaire from his tragically barren wife. They built their entire foundation of happiness directly on top of my absolute misery. They thought I would simply fade into the background, a pathetic casualty of their grand romantic and financial ambitions. I pulled my attention back to the present moment, back to the gleaming boardroom and the wealthy investors waiting for my input. I smiled at Richard, feeling the sharp, cold power radiating through my veins. The Clara from 3 years ago was dead and buried. The woman sitting in this chair was a predator, and she was already several steps ahead of her prey. The trap I had spent years building was finally snapping shut, and Logan had just walked blindly into the jaws. The transformation from the shattered woman weeping on the kitchen floor to the apex predator sitting in that glass-walled boardroom did not happen by accident. It was forged in the fire of a single devastating revelation that occurred exactly 6 months after a judge finalized my divorce. I was living in a cramped, poorly lit apartment on the outskirts of the city, carefully counting my pennies and trying to piece my fractured identity back together. I still woke up most mornings feeling a heavy, suffocating hollow in my chest, entirely convinced that my body was a barren wasteland. I believed I was the reason my marriage had imploded. I believed I was biologically inadequate, a complete failure as a woman. Then, on a dreary Tuesday afternoon, the mail arrived. Among the stack of cheap takeout menus and utility bills was a thick, formal envelope bearing the logo of Vanguard Premier Health, the luxury joint insurance provider Logan and I had used during our marriage. I almost threw it away, assuming it was just a final notice of account closure. But a strange, nagging instinct compelled me to tear it open. Inside was a routine audit statement regarding an outstanding balance from the Chicago Elite Fertility Institute. The balance was relatively small, just a few $100s for administrative processing, but the attached itemized ledger caught my eye. As a marketing director who routinely analyzed complex data sets, I had a habit of reading the fine print. I scanned the densely packed rows of medical billing codes. None of them matched the treatments or diagnostic procedures associated with premature ovarian failure. There were no codes for female hormone panels, no charges for ovarian ultrasounds, and no indicators of female infertility diagnostics. Instead, the ledger was filled with highly specific, advanced urological billing codes. I sat on my cheap secondhand sofa, staring at the alphanumeric strings, a cold sense of confusion creeping down my neck. I immediately grabbed my laptop and typed the codes into a medical database. The search results loaded in a fraction of a second, and the breath completely left my body. The codes were for advanced male genetic screening, testicular mapping, and consultations for severe, irreversible, non-obstructive azoospermia, male factor infertility, absolute incurable sterility. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone and dialed the insurance provider. I navigated the automated menus until I reached a human representative. I provided my social security number, verifying my identity as the primary policyholder on that old joint account. I asked the agent to clarify the charges, explaining that there must have been a catastrophic administrative error because I was the one who had been diagnosed with infertility, not my ex-husband. The representative put me on a brief hold. When she returned, her voice was painfully polite and entirely matter-of-fact. She informed me that she was looking at the unredacted finalized diagnostic report submitted directly by the chief of reproductive endocrinology at the clinic. The billing codes were entirely correct. The patient evaluated was Logan. The finalized diagnosis on file was absolute genetic male sterility. The secondary file indicated a perfectly healthy female partner. There was no record of premature ovarian failure for anyone on this policy. The phone slipped from my grasp, landing on the floor with a dull thud. The walls of my tiny apartment seemed to violently spin. I did not just stop at the insurance call. I was possessed by a frantic, consuming need for the absolute truth. I drove directly to the Chicago Elite Fertility Institute. I walked right up to the administrative desk and legally demanded my complete unredacted patient file, threatening to bring my own lawyers down on the clinic if they withheld a single piece of paper. Faced with a highly agitated, legally entitled patient, the terrified receptionist printed the entire archive. I sat in my car in this clinic parking lot, flipping through the heavy stack of documents. The truth was laid out in black and white, undeniable and brutal. My reproductive health was flawless. Logan was the one who was entirely permanently barren. He carried a severe genetic anomaly that meant he would never, under any medical circumstance, father a biological child. But Logan could never accept that reality. In his hyper-masculine, cutthroat financial world, weakness was blood in the water. To men like Logan, projecting the image of a dominant, virile alpha male was more important than oxygen. Furthermore, his family trust fund strictly required him to produce an heir to unlock the multi-million-dollar principal. Being diagnosed as sterile was not just a blow to his fragile ego, it was an absolute financial catastrophe. So Logan did what corrupt men of wealth always do. He bought his way out of reality. Buried deep in the clinic administrative logs, I found the paper trail of his betrayal. There was a record of a massive exorbitant payment made from Logan private offshore account to the clinic director. It was vaguely labeled as an anonymous research donation. In exchange for that massive bribe, the corrupt doctor had drafted the falsified medical documents diagnosing me with premature ovarian failure. Logan had paid a fortune to literally rewrite medical science. He chose to entirely destroy my self-worth, my sanity, and my reality just to protect his pathetic, fragile pride. He handed me those fake documents with a cold, calculated stare, knowing he was shattering my heart into a million pieces. He used the lie to cleanly execute our divorce, securing his assets, and painting himself as the tragic deprived husband forced to leave his defective wife. The realization about Naomi hit me next, sickening and clear. Logan needed to justify leaving me quickly, and Naomi was already waiting in the wings. He used the fake diagnosis to push me away, and Naomi played her part flawlessly, echoing his lies and convincing me to surrender everything without a fight. They manufactured a tragedy to cover up an affair and a pathetic medical secret. Sitting in the driver's seat of my car, staring at the forged documents and the real ones side by side, something fundamental shifted inside me. The crushing, suffocating grief that had drowned me for the past 6 months vanished in an instant. The tears drying on my cheeks were the absolute last tears I would ever shed for Logan. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by a pure, crystallized, terrifying rage. I was not broken. I was not barren. I was the victim of a calculated psychological execution orchestrated by the man who had promised to protect me and the woman who had promised to be my best friend. I started the engine of my car. I did not drive home to cry. I drove back to the city, my mind operating with a terrifying, razor-sharp clarity. Logan wanted to play a game of ruthless financial destruction and fake legacies. He thought he had left me powerless. He had absolutely no idea that by revealing his ultimate weakness, he had just handed me the exact blueprint I needed to systematically burn his entire world to ashes. I did not drive to Logan's luxury penthouse to confront him. I did not call Naomi to scream insults into the receiver. Emotional outbursts were the weapons of the powerless, and I absolutely refused to be powerless ever again. Instead, I drove back to my tiny, poorly lit apartment, opened my laptop, and began drafting a comprehensive business plan. The rage burning inside me was a limitless fuel source, and I channeled every single drop of it into absolute, ruthless corporate ambition. I possessed a decade of elite marketing experience, a brilliant mind for strategy, and an aggressive hunger that could not be satisfied by simply surviving. I liquidated the meager savings I had left. I took out high-risk business loans that would have terrified a sane person. I launched my own boutique marketing and consulting firm, specifically targeting the aggressive male-dominated venture capital sector of Chicago. The first year was a grueling, sleepless blur. I worked 20-hour days fueled by black coffee and the vivid burning memory of Logan's condescending smirk. I pitched to tech startups, aggressive hedge funds, and private equity sharks. I did not just offer them standard marketing strategies, I offered them corporate warfare. I showed them how to completely decimate their competitors, how to manipulate market narratives, and how to aggressively acquire struggling assets. My methods were sharp, entirely legal, but completely merciless. Word of my effectiveness spread quickly through the financial district. The men who ran Chicago's venture capital scene respected only one thing: undeniable results. And I delivered massive, irrefutable results. By the end of my first year, my firm had secured exclusive partnerships with three of the most powerful venture capital groups in the Midwest. My income skyrocketed from a panicked trickle into a massive, overflowing river of wealth. I moved out of that cramped apartment and purchased a stunning multi-million-dollar penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. I rebuilt my wardrobe, my professional connections, and my entire identity. But becoming incredibly wealthy was never my ultimate goal. Wealth was simply the ammunition I required to hunt my prey. As my firm grew in power and influence, I began quietly and methodically mapping out Logan's entire financial ecosystem. Logan was a senior partner at a prestigious wealth management firm, but his personal portfolio was heavily leveraged. He lived a life of extreme luxury, funding Naomi's highly expensive tastes, financing their massive new estate, and projecting the image of an untouchable billionaire titan. But I knew the absolute truth. I knew his family trust fund was strictly locked until he produced a biological heir. I also knew that because he was genetically sterile, he would never legally unlock that principal sum. This meant his current lavish lifestyle was funded almost entirely by aggressive borrowing, fragile credit lines, and high-risk corporate margins. I hired discreet, elite forensic accountants. We traced every single one of Logan's investments, his hidden debts, and his vulnerable corporate assets. I learned that his firm was heavily exposed in the commercial real estate market and deeply tied to a specific bundle of struggling tech startups. Over the past 2 years, I did not just watch his firm slowly bleed, I actively poisoned the water. Using shell companies and blind trusts managed by my venture capital partners, I began quietly acquiring the debt of the companies Logan relied upon. I bought up the commercial leases for the buildings his firm occupied. I aggressively outmaneuvered his firm on key acquisitions, subtly bleeding his quarterly profits dry while remaining entirely invisible. Logan thought he was experiencing a string of terrible, unexplainable market luck. He had absolutely no idea that an invisible hand was wrapping a financial garrote around his throat, slowly tightening the wire month after month. I knew his desperation would eventually cloud his judgment. Logan was an arrogant man, and arrogant men always believe they can outsmart the market. I needed to create a scenario where he would willingly walk into his own financial execution. Working alongside my top-tier investors, I meticulously crafted a highly confidential encrypted portfolio. On paper, it looked like a once-in-a-lifetime acquisition, a golden opportunity filled with undervalued tech assets that promised astronomical returns. I used my own marketing genius to seed fabricated rumors throughout the financial district, ensuring Logan would hear whispers of this exclusive, highly guarded investment package. In reality, it was a beautifully packaged bomb. The portfolio was loaded with toxic debt, pending violations, and catastrophic liabilities that had been deliberately buried beneath layers of complex financial jargon. I positioned my venture capital partners as the exclusive gatekeepers to this salvation, knowing that eventually his struggling firm would force him to seek our help. I laid these traps with absolute precision, preparing for the inevitable moment Logan and Naomi would cross my path again. I anticipated his arrogance. I anticipated his greed. I ensured that when he finally reached out his hand to save his failing empire, he would be grasping the very instrument of his own destruction. I pulled my attention back to the present moment, sitting in the glass-walled boardroom with Richard and the venture capitalists. The wait was finally over. The ambush in the hospital lobby had been the perfect opening move, a psychological strike designed to rattle Logan and terrify Naomi. Now, it was time to execute the financial strategy I had spent 2 years perfecting. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the mahogany table, smiling at the executives gathered around me. My mind was sharp, clear, and utterly devoid of mercy. The trap was set. The bait was ready. I was about to dismantle the man who had tried to erase me, and I was going to enjoy every single second of his ruin. Exactly 1 week after the hospital encounter, the universe delivered my next opportunity on a silver platter. I was attending the annual Women in Leadership charity luncheon at the Crystal Pavilion in Connecticut, an ultra-exclusive event where billion-dollar deals were whispered over plates of poached salmon and vintage champagne. I stood near the towering glass windows overlooking the manicured estate grounds, holding a flute of sparkling water, dressed in a sharply tailored, immaculate white silk suit. I was currently conversing with two prominent hedge fund managers, securing the final pieces of capital for my venture firm. My assistant caught my eye from across the room, giving a subtle nod toward the grand entrance. I followed her gaze and felt a sharp thrill of anticipation. Naomi had arrived. She looked entirely out of place among the poised, effortless wealth of the room. She was wearing a designer dress from 2 seasons ago, her hair styled in a desperate attempt to project the image of a carefree socialite. But the cracks were glaringly visible to anyone paying attention. Her smile was tight, her posture was rigid, and her eyes darted frantically around the room until they locked onto me. She marched past the catering staff, cutting a direct path toward my table. Driven by sheer greed and absolute desperation, she had somehow tracked me down, likely bribing a caterer or using one of Logan's dwindling social connections to slip past the security desk. I smoothly excused myself from the hedge fund managers, stepping into a quieter, secluded alcove framed by tall floral arrangements. I wanted to give Naomi the privacy to completely humiliate herself without interruption. Clara. Naomi breathed out as she approached, pasting on a wide, painfully fake smile. It is so incredibly hard to get a hold of you these days. You have security everywhere. I took a slow sip of my water, letting my silence stretch until her smile began to falter. Hello, Naomi, I replied smoothly. I assume you did not crash a $10,000 a plate charity luncheon just to compliment my security detail. What do you want? Naomi dropped the enthusiastic best friend act and instantly transitioned into her favorite role, the tragic victim. She let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, her shoulders slumping as if she were carrying the weight of the entire world. I know things have been tense between us, Clara, she began, her voice taking on a pleading, honeyed tone. But I am here because I desperately need your help. You are the only one I can turn to. We used to be like sisters. I am hoping you can do me a sisterly favor. A sisterly favor. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the phrase almost made me laugh out loud. The woman who had crawled into my marital bed while wiping my tears over a fake infertility diagnosis was now standing in front of me begging for a favor based on our shared history. I maintained a perfectly blank expression. I am listening. Naomi glanced around nervously before leaning in closer. It is Damon, she whispered, her voice tight with genuine panic. His luxury real estate investments are failing. The market shifted, and his primary development project in downtown Chicago has completely stalled. The contractors are threatening to walk off the site, and the bank is refusing to extend his credit line. If he does not secure an immediate capital injection, he is going to default. He will lose everything, Clara. And if he loses everything, I lose everything. I knew exactly which development project she was talking about. I knew because my venture capital partners were the ones who had quietly bought up the debt on that specific property and aggressively squeezed the contractor margins. I had orchestrated Damon's financial crisis just as deliberately as I was orchestrating Logan's. And how exactly does Damon's failing business concern me? I asked, my tone as cold as winter ice. Naomi flashed a look of sudden, ugly desperation. We need a loan, Clara. Just $500,000. It is a bridge loan just to keep the contractors on site until the next funding round clears. I know you have it. Everyone in the city knows your new marketing firm is generating massive revenue. 500,000 is pocket change for you now. I stared at her genuinely, marveling at the staggering entitlement. You want me to give you $500,000 to bail out your new husband? Naomi bristled, sensing my utter lack of sympathy. She crossed her arms, her victim mask slipping to reveal the bitter, resentful woman underneath. You owe us, Clara. You owe Logan, and by extension, you owe me. I tilted my head, studying her like a fascinating insect trapped in a jar. I owe you. Please, Naomi, enlighten me. How exactly do I owe the two of you anything? You ruined his financial trajectory when you left, she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Do you have any idea how much stress you caused Logan during the divorce? You were so difficult, crying all the time, making him feel guilty for needing a biological legacy. You completely distracted him from his work. Because of your emotional instability, his firm lost 2 major accounts that year. His finances have been incredibly rocky ever since. You walked away and magically built this glamorous new life for yourself, while Logan had to pick up the pieces of the mess you left behind. It is the least you can do to help us out now. The sheer delusion of her narrative was breathtaking. She had fully convinced herself that my devastation over a falsified medical diagnosis was an inconvenience that had unfairly damaged Logan's career. She believed my current wealth was somehow an unjust reward that I was morally obligated to share with the people who had conspired to destroy me. Let me make sure I understand this perfectly, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. You want me to hand you $500,000 to save the husband you are currently cheating on, because you believe I traumatized the ex-husband you stole from me. Naomi flinched as if I had struck her across the face. Her eyes darted around the alcove, terrified that someone might have overheard my blunt assessment of her tangled, pathetic love life. Clara, keep your voice down, she panicked. You do not understand what is happening. Damon is not a man you can just cross. If he goes bankrupt, he is going to start looking very closely at where all our money is going. He is going to notice the funds I have been secretly funneling to Logan to help keep his wealth management firm afloat. I filed that spectacular piece of information away immediately. Naomi was stealing from Damon to subsidize Logan's failing business. The incestuous financial mess they had created was even more beautiful and fragile than I had originally calculated. Please. Clara, Naomi begged, tears actually welling up in her eyes now. I am terrified. Damon has a temper. If he loses his real estate empire and he finds out about Logan, he will destroy me. You are a woman. You understand how hard it is to survive in this world. I am begging you as your old best friend, just wire the funds. Consider it a late divorce settlement. Consider it closure. She reached out, attempting to grab my hand in a gesture of desperate solidarity. I stepped back smoothly, ensuring her hands grasped only empty air. I looked at her, taking in the pathetic, trembling wreck of a woman who had once stood in my kitchen and confidently told me to walk away with dignity. The wheel had finally turned, and I was holding the executioner's axe. I let my hands fall gracefully to my sides, my posture radiating absolute control. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power does not shout. It whispers. Closure. I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue as if tasting something incredibly bitter. You want closure, Naomi. You want me to write a check for $500,000 to clean up the catastrophic financial mess you created. Let us look at the actual numbers, shall we? Since you decided to bring business to a charity luncheon, let us talk about your balance sheet. Naomi blinked, her tear-filled eyes widening in sudden raw confusion. Clara, please keep your voice down. I ignored her plea entirely. Damon is currently over-leveraged by exactly $4.2 million on the River North Development Project. I stated, my voice crisp and authoritative, projecting just enough to carry to the nearby tables. The primary contractor, a firm managed by one of my closest investors, halted work exactly 12 days ago due to 3 consecutive bounced payments. Furthermore, Damon has 2 pending lawsuits from minority investors demanding an immediate audit of his luxury real estate holding company. Naomi took a step backward, her back hitting the edge of a marble pillar. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her expensive foundation looking like a poorly applied mask. How do you know that? She gasped, her voice trembling. Nobody knows the exact numbers. Damon kept it completely quiet. I know everything, I replied, taking a deliberate step forward, invading her personal space. I also know about the 3 platinum credit cards you have entirely maxed out under your maiden name, totaling $75,000 in consumer debt. But that is just pocket change, isn't it? The real issue is the wire transfers. Naomi's breath hitched. She looked as though she might physically collapse. Yes, the wire transfers? I continued, my tone relentless and sharp. Over the past 6 months, you have initiated 17 separate transactions from Damon's secondary business accounts directly to a shell LLC controlled by Logan. The total amounts to exactly $140,000. You have been actively embezzling funds from your current husband to subsidize the failing wealth management firm of the man you are secretly sleeping with. Stop, Naomi whispered, tears spilling over her eyelashes, ruining her mascara. Clara, I swear it is not what it looks like. Logan promised he would pay it back once his quarterly bonuses cleared. He manipulated me. Do not insult my intelligence by playing the victim. I shot back, slicing through her pathetic defense. You are not a victim. You are a parasite. You crawled into my life, fed on my misery, and then attached yourself to Damon the second he offered you a bigger house and a platinum ring. And now that Damon's ship is sinking, you are draining his lifeboats to keep your ex-lover afloat. That is not manipulation, Naomi. That is calculated, systematic fraud. Several guests at the adjacent tables had stopped pretending to eat their poached salmon. The clinking of silverware faded. The elite socialites and powerful hedge fund managers were now blatantly eavesdropping, their eyes locked on the unfolding spectacle. In this exclusive Connecticut circle, financial ruin and high society infidelity were the ultimate spectator sports. I watched the realization wash over her, the sheer blinding panic of a woman who realized she brought a plastic knife to a gunfight. For 3 years, I had analyzed every move she made. I had tracked her spending habits, her social climbing, and her pathetic attempts to maintain a facade of extreme wealth. She genuinely believed her secrets were safe. She believed she was the smartest person in the room because she had successfully manipulated me once when I was crippled by medical trauma. She forgot that trauma is the ultimate educator. Naomi realized we had a captive audience. She panicked, her hands flying up to cover her face. "Clara, please," she begged, her voice cracking with profound humiliation. "Everyone is staring. You are ruining me. If this gets back to Damon, he will kill me. He will take Lucas. He will leave me with absolutely nothing." "You already have nothing," I stated, delivering the cold, undeniable truth. "You own nothing. The mansion is in Damon's name. The cars are leased through his company. The prenuptial agreement you signed specifically voids any alimony in the event of documented infidelity. You are a house of cards waiting for a single gust of wind. And you thought you could walk into my arena wearing a badly tailored dress and manipulate me with fake tears to write you a bailout check." I smiled. It was a pristine, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. It was the smile of a woman who had meticulously mapped out her enemy's destruction. "I am not a bank for morally bankrupt women," I said, my voice ringing clear across the silent alcove. "I do not finance thieves, and I certainly do not subsidize the pathetic men they sleep with. You came here asking for a sisterly favor. Here is my favor, Naomi. Run. Run as fast as you can before Damon checks his transaction history. Because the clock is ticking and your time is officially up." Naomi stood paralyzed, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around the room. She saw the wealthy attendees whispering to one another, their faces contorted with disgust and morbid fascination. The society she had sacrificed everything to join was currently watching her public execution. She had been completely, utterly exposed. She let out a choked, humiliated sob, turned on her heel, and fled. She practically ran toward the exit, pushing past the catering staff and nearly tripping over her own heels in her desperate rush to escape the Crystal Pavilion. She shoved the heavy glass doors open, disappearing into the valet parking area, leaving behind nothing but the scent of cheap perfume and the shattered remnants of her reputation. The whispers in the room immediately escalated into an aggressive, buzzing hive of gossip. By tomorrow morning, every major player in the Connecticut and Chicago luxury real estate markets would know that Damon's wife was siphoning funds to an ex-lover. I watched her go, feeling a profound, intoxicating rush of pure satisfaction. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for 3 years dissolved entirely, replaced by the sheer thrill of absolute dominance. I had not laid a single finger on her. I had simply held up a mirror and forced her to look at her own horrific reflection. I smoothed the lapels of my white silk suit, turned around, and walked calmly back toward my table. The hedge fund managers looked at me with a newfound, profound respect. In their world, ruthlessness was a highly valued commodity. I had just demonstrated that I could publicly dismantle an adversary without breaking a sweat or raising my voice. "My apologies for the interruption, gentlemen," I said, taking my seat and picking up my flute of sparkling water. "We were discussing the capital gains tax implications on the new tech acquisition. Shall we continue?" They nodded eagerly, sliding the financial portfolios back toward the center of the table. I took a sip of my water, my mind already moving to the next phase of the operation. Naomi was dealt with. She would spend the next few weeks living in absolute terror, frantically trying to cover her tracks before Damon inevitably discovered the truth. That was the first domino falling flawlessly into place. Now it was time to focus on the main target. It was time to deal with Logan. 2 days later, I was seated in a curved leather booth at the Obsidian Room, Chicago's most exclusive Michelin-starred steakhouse. I had intentionally leaked my dinner reservation to a highly talkative mutual acquaintance, fully anticipating the desperate animal that would soon walk through the heavy mahogany doors. Logan was drowning. My elite forensic accountants had confirmed that his prestigious wealth management firm was currently bleeding capital at an unprecedented catastrophic rate. An impending IRS audit loomed over his head like a sharpened guillotine, threatening to expose years of aggressive, highly illegal tax evasion tactics. Bankruptcy was no longer just a distant, abstract possibility. It was actively breathing down his neck, threatening to strip away his entire identity. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water just as Logan slid into the booth across from me, uninvited. "Hello, Clara," he said, flashing a tight, heavily practiced smile that failed to reach his eyes. I set my glass down, examining him with absolute clinical detachment. The physical toll of impending financial ruin was glaringly obvious. His custom suit hung loose on his frame, hinting at rapid stress-induced weight loss. Dark circles under his eyes could not be masked by his arrogant posture. He signaled a waiter with an entitled snap of his fingers, ordering a bottle of the expensive Bordeaux I used to drink. "I do not drink red wine anymore, Logan," I said smoothly. "But please order a glass for your own nerves. You look utterly exhausted." Logan bristled, waving the waiter away with a frustrated flick of his wrist. He leaned forward across the table, attempting to invade my personal space, utilizing the same manipulative physical proximity he used to control me years ago. "I am not here to fight with you, Clara," he murmured, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, intimate whisper. "I am here to offer an olive branch, a truce." "A truce," I repeated, allowing a faint, highly amused smile to touch my lips. "That implies we are currently engaged in a war with equal footing. From my perspective, I am simply enjoying an excellent dinner while you are desperately sweating in a luxury restaurant." He ignored the blatant insult, his sheer financial desperation completely overriding his usual explosive, fragile temper. "Things have been somewhat chaotic lately," he admitted, trying to frame his impending bankruptcy as a minor, easily fixable professional hurdle. "The market is shifting rapidly. My firm is repositioning our core assets, restructuring our investment portfolios. It is standard corporate evolution, but we both know exactly how cutthroat the Chicago financial district is right now. I need an aggressive injection of fresh capital to smooth over a temporary, unexpected liquidity issue." I leaned back against the plush leather upholstery, casually crossing my arms. "And what exactly does your temporary liquidity issue have to do with me?" Logan placed his hands flat on the polished table, trying to project an aura of earnest vulnerability. "I know all about your new partnerships, Clara. Everyone in the Gold Coast is whispering about the venture capital groups backing your agency. You have direct, unrestricted access to the most liquid, aggressive investors in the entire Midwest. You have insider knowledge on their upcoming acquisitions and their distressed asset offloads. I need you to vouch for me. I need you to grant me immediate access to your investor network and secure a bridge loan for my firm." I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity of his demand hang in the quiet air of the steakhouse. "You want me to risk my flawless professional reputation to bail out the man who fabricated a medical diagnosis to discard me?" "Clara, please!" Logan pleaded, his mask of corporate dominance finally cracking to reveal the terrified, cornered man underneath. "We used to be an incredible team. We built our early wealth and our entire life together. I know the divorce was exceptionally ugly, and I know feelings were deeply hurt. But business is business, and we are both rational adults. If you introduce me to your partners and secure this funding, I will publicly credit your agency. I will ensure every major player in my circle brings their marketing accounts directly to your doorstep. We can call a truce. I will stop bad-mouthing you to our old crowd. I will leave you alone." He was actually attempting to guilt-trip me into saving his life, offering his own basic human decency as a highly valuable bargaining chip. "Let us drop the pathetic corporate posturing, Logan," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial, razor-sharp tone. You are not repositioning assets. You are facing an imminent catastrophic IRS audit. You leveraged your entire firm on commercial real estate properties that have completely stalled. You are millions in debt, and if you do not secure a massive capital injection by the end of this quarter, you face federal fraud charges and total bankruptcy. Logan recoiled violently as if I had thrown boiling water into his face. His eyes darted frantically around the restaurant, terrified someone at a neighboring table had heard my brutal summary of his financial death sentence. How do you know that? He hissed, his voice vibrating with absolute undeniable panic. I am exceptionally good at my job, I replied smoothly. And unlike you, I perform thorough due diligence. He swallowed hard, the last remaining remnants of his arrogance dissolving into pure, pathetic desperation. He reached across the table, his hands shaking. Clara, if I go down, Naomi and the baby go down with me. We will lose the new house. We will lose everything. You know what it feels like to hit rock bottom. I am begging you. Just make the introduction. Give me access to one of their undervalued portfolios. I can flip it. I can save my firm and protect my family. I watched him beg. This was the exact man who had stood in my kitchen 3 years ago, coldly telling me I was biologically useless and financially burdensome. Now he was practically trembling over a steakhouse table, pleading for absolute salvation from the very woman he had actively tried to destroy. I let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing minute. I needed him to feel the suffocating weight of his total dependence on me. I needed him to be so blindly desperate for a lifeline that he would not examine the rope I was about to hand him. I suppose everyone deserves a chance to redeem their legacy, I said quietly, feigning a tone of reluctant, measured sympathy. My venture capital partners are currently holding a highly confidential, encrypted portfolio. It is a distressed asset package, mostly failing tech startups and bad debt. It requires an immediate, highly aggressive buyer who knows how to restructure quickly. If you acquire it, the projected turnaround could theoretically cover your liquidity issues long before the IRS finalizes their impending audit. Logan's eyes lit up with wild, greedy hope. He was a drowning man, and I had just offered him a golden raft. He did not know the raft was packed with highly volatile explosives. I will do it, he said instantly, his voice thick with overwhelming relief. Whatever the portfolio is, I will buy it. Clara, thank you. You have absolutely no idea what this means to me. I know exactly what it means, Logan, I replied, picking up my glass of sparkling water. My legal team will send the non-disclosure agreements to your office tomorrow morning. Review them closely, sign them immediately, and we will finalize your grand new acquisition. I smiled at him across the table. It was a beautiful, entirely lethal smile. The second domino had just been pushed. Section 9, 1,000 words. I watched him leave the restaurant. His shoulders slightly less hunched, fueled by the false adrenaline of a man who believed he had just outsmarted his own demise. He practically sprinted out of the steakhouse. The sheer blinding desperation radiating from him was almost palpable. The following morning, my legal team initiated the sequence. I sat in my office overlooking the Chicago River, sipping espresso, while my lead corporate attorney finalized the paperwork. The document we were preparing was not a standard non-disclosure agreement. It was a financial bear trap. The contract specifically stated that by receiving and decrypting our proprietary asset portfolio, Logan and his wealth management firm assumed legal responsibility for the restructuring strategy. If he attempted to leak the data back out after decryption or expose the venture capital groups involved, he would trigger a penalty clause that would instantly liquidate his remaining personal assets. I invited Logan to my office at exactly 1 in the afternoon. I knew he would arrive early. He was waiting in the reception area 20 minutes ahead of schedule, nervously tapping his expensive leather briefcase against his leg. When my assistant ushered him in, I made a calculated display of dismissing my staff and closing the heavy glass doors to ensure total privacy. I walked over to the sleek, minimalist coffee table and sat down, gesturing for him to take the seat opposite me. I needed to appear accessible and just a little bit vulnerable. Logan. I said, softening my voice to mimic the gentle tone I used during our marriage. I have spent the entire morning advocating for you with my senior partners. They were reluctant to release this portfolio to an outside firm. I had to personally guarantee you have the discretion and aggressive competence to handle an acquisition of this magnitude. Logan puffed out his chest, his fragile masculinity instantly inflating at the mere suggestion that he was a financial predator. You made the right call, Clara, he assured me, leaning forward with that familiar arrogant swagger. My firm specializes in aggressive turnarounds. Whatever this package entails, I have the infrastructure to flip it and generate massive yields. You are not going to regret trusting me with this. I slid a heavy, silver encrypted flash drive across the glass table. It stopped mere inches from his hand. Inside this drive is the complete financial architecture of distressed tech startups, I explained. On the surface, their debt-to-income ratios look terrifying. That is why current stakeholders are desperate to offload them at a catastrophic loss. But the proprietary algorithms hidden within their coding are worth hundreds of millions to the right buyer. Logan stared at the silver drive as if it were the holy grail. His eyes widened with unfiltered, ravenous greed. He reached for it, but I placed my hand firmly over his, stopping him. Not yet, I said, maintaining my soft, earnest expression while looking deeply into his eyes. Because of the extremely sensitive nature of these algorithms, my partners require absolute legal immunity before you decrypt the files. I picked up the bound legal document from the table and handed him a custom pen. This is a binding non-disclosure and liability assumption agreement, I stated clearly. It explicitly prevents you from shopping these assets to other buyers. It also stipulates that upon accessing the proprietary data, your firm assumes the primary risk position for the restructuring phase. It is standard boilerplate language for venture capital transfers, but my lawyers are exceptionally aggressive about penalty clauses. Logan flipped open the document, scanning the first page, his eyes darting quickly over the legal jargon. I knew exactly how his mind operated. He relied on junior associates to read the fine print. Driven by the ticking clock of his impending federal audit, he did not have the patience or humility to call his legal team for a thorough review. He wanted to close the deal right there, right then, to prove he was the decisive, powerful titan he always claimed to be. Clara. I do these kinds of acquisitions every single day, he scoffed lightly, flipping straight to the signature page. I understand how risk assumption works. The greater the liability on paper, the higher the ultimate payout when the restructuring is complete. You do not need to explain basic corporate strategy to me. I withdrew my hand, clasping my fingers to hide my absolute thrilling triumph. Then sign it, Logan, I said softly. Sign it, take the drive, and save your legacy. He did not hesitate for another second. He gripped the fountain pen and slashed his flamboyant, aggressive signature across the bottom line. He dated the final page. He handed the document back to me with a triumphant, arrogant smile. Consider it done, he declared, snatching the encrypted flash drive from the table and dropping it securely into his leather briefcase. You just saved my firm, Clara. I knew you still cared about what we built together. I smiled back at him. It was a warm, manufactured expression that masked the lethal, calculating monster sitting beneath my skin. I care about ensuring that everyone gets exactly what they deserve, Logan. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, oblivious to the fact that he had just signed his own financial death warrant. He thanked me again and walked out of my office with the confident stride of a conquering king. I waited until the glass doors clicked completely shut behind him. I picked up the signed contract, staring at his ink on the paper. The toxic assets inside that flash drive carried pending federal compliance violations, union lawsuits, and hidden environmental liabilities that would transfer to his firm the second his servers decrypted the data. His company was now legally anchored to millions of dollars in inescapable catastrophic debt. The trap had snapped completely shut, crushing him, and he had happily provided the bait himself. With Logan's financial execution quietly ticking away on his servers, I turned my attention to the second phase of my strategy. Financial ruin would destroy his ego, but it would not destroy his legacy. For a man entirely obsessed with his bloodline, the only way to truly break him was to shatter the living symbol of his masculinity. I needed irrefutable, undeniable proof of the secret I had leveraged in the hospital lobby. 6 months prior, immediately after uncovering Logan's sterile diagnosis, I had retained the services of an elite private intelligence firm. I did not hire a standard divorce detective. I hired former federal operatives who specialized in corporate espionage and untraceable surveillance. My lead operative was a phantom of a man named Cole. I gave Cole unlimited funding and one singular objective. I needed absolute biological proof of the child's true parentage. Naomi was incredibly careless. She lived in a bubble of false security, entirely convinced of her own untouchable brilliance. She frequently paraded little Lucas around the most affluent parks in the city, playing the role of the exhausted but perfect mother. Cole tracked her movements for weeks, waiting patiently for the perfect frictionless opportunity. It happened on a sunny Thursday afternoon at a pristine, manicured park in the wealthy suburbs. Naomi was distracted, aggressively texting on her phone, likely arguing with Logan or desperately checking Damon's failing accounts. Lucas was sitting in his designer stroller. He dropped his custom pacifier onto the pavement. Naomi, disgusted by the dirt, simply kicked it aside and pulled a fresh one from her expensive diaper bag, leaving the contaminated one behind. Cole swept in the moment she walked away, bagging the discarded plastic in a sterile evidence container. He had successfully secured the child's DNA. Getting Logan's genetic profile was completely effortless. His raw medical file from the fertility clinic, the very document I had legally seized, already contained his complete genetic sequencing. However, to prove the child belonged to Damon, I needed Damon's DNA. Cole managed that during a high-stakes real estate mixer in downtown Chicago. Damon had abandoned a crystal whiskey glass on a high-top table. Cole secured the glass, preserving the saliva and epithelial cells perfectly. I bypassed standard consumer testing companies. I sent the 3 discrete biological profiles to a private, highly accredited forensic laboratory in Switzerland. This was a facility that processed genetic evidence for international custody disputes and elite inheritance claims. Their testing protocols were flawless, and their results were legally bulletproof. I remember the exact moment the courier delivered the heavy, tamper-evident parcel to my penthouse. I stood in my kitchen, a sharp contrast to the day Logan had handed me those forged medical papers 3 years ago. My hands did not shake. I felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical anticipation. I sliced open the thick envelope. The laboratory report was printed on crisp, watermarked paper. I traced my finger down the columns of complex genetic markers until I reached the final definitive conclusion on the last page. Probability of paternity regarding subject A, Logan 0%. Probability of paternity regarding subject B, Damon 99.9%. The satisfaction was utterly intoxicating. Naomi had not just slept with Logan, she had slept with both men simultaneously, playing a dangerous, reckless game of genetic roulette. When she discovered she was pregnant, she realized pinning the child on Logan was her ultimate ticket to destroying my marriage and securing Logan's vast wealth. She knew Logan was desperate for an heir to unlock his trust fund. She handed him Damon's child, and Logan was so blinded by his own toxic masculinity that he never demanded a paternity test. He eagerly claimed the boy, completely unaware he was raising the offspring of another man. I did not just file the results in a drawer, I weaponized them. I hired a specialized graphic design contractor, bound by an airtight non-disclosure agreement, to digitize the laboratory findings. I directed them to create stark, highly visual presentation slides. The slides highlighted the indisputable percentages in bold, aggressive typography. The medical jargon was stripped away, leaving only the brutal, unavoidable truth. The data was deliberately formatted to be projected on massive, high-definition screens. I made multiple physical copies, securing the original Swiss laboratory documents inside a waterproof, fireproof vault at my bank. I drafted an anonymous, highly secured digital drop containing the files. I coded a scheduled release ready to be dispatched to every major financial news outlet, socialite blog, and society reporter in Chicago with a single keystroke. The pieces were fully assembled. Logan was currently downloading a virus that would obliterate his company. The genetic proof was sealed and loaded. Damon was still ignorant, but perfectly positioned to explode the moment his fierce pride was challenged. Naomi was trapped in the middle, rapidly running out of air, entirely unaware that the walls were closing in from every direction. All I needed now was the perfect stage. I needed a public arena where none of them could escape the blast radius, an event so grand that their destruction would be witnessed by the entire city. The trap for Logan was set, the genetic evidence was locked away, and the final piece of the puzzle was to orchestrate Damon's inevitable collision with reality. I did not want Naomi's destruction to come solely from my hands. I wanted the man she had manipulated, stolen from, and deceived to be the architect of her ultimate ruin. Damon was not a fool. He was a ruthless real estate developer who had fought his way up from the South Side, building an empire on calculated aggression and meticulous attention to detail. However, when it came to Naomi, he had developed a lethal blind spot. She played the role of the devoted, supportive wife so flawlessly that he never questioned the rapidly expanding cracks in their financial foundation. But blind spots can be cured with the right illumination. I needed to ignite the match, but my fingerprints had to remain entirely invisible. I could not risk Damon discovering my involvement too early and assuming this was a petty revenge plot. He needed to believe he was uncovering a grand, terrifying conspiracy entirely on his own. I accessed a secure encrypted server maintained by my offshore security team. We compiled a highly sanitized dossier. It contained no mention of my name, no genetic test results, and no obvious narrative. It was simply a collection of raw, unassailable financial data and subtle timeline discrepancies. The first document was a heavily redacted summary of the wire transfers Naomi had executed from Damon's secondary business accounts to Logan's Shell LLC. The account numbers were visible, the dates were highlighted, and the destination entity was clearly linked to Logan's wealth management firm. The second piece of evidence was more insidious. It was a digital copy of a luxury hotel receipt from the Mandarin Oriental dated 14 months ago. The reservation was booked under Naomi's maiden name, but the room service charge was paid with Logan's corporate credit card. The third and most crucial piece of the puzzle was a timeline graphic I had commissioned. It laid out the dates of the hotel reservations, alongside Naomi's initial pregnancy announcements and early ultrasound appointments. The timeline did not make explicit accusations. It simply highlighted the mathematical impossibility of Logan being the father based on the documented hotel stays and the subsequent gestational development. I instructed my security team to physicalize the dossier. They printed the documents on sterile, untraceable paper and placed them in a standard, unmarked manila envelope. The delivery method had to be flawless. It could not arrive at Damon's home where Naomi might intercept it. It had to be delivered directly into his hands when he was most vulnerable to the paranoia I was cultivating. We timed the delivery for a Wednesday afternoon, exactly when Damon was scheduled to hold a massive high-stakes crisis meeting with his struggling contractors at his stalled River North development site. The tension would be suffocating his stress levels, redlining his patience entirely depleted. My operative, dressed as a standard courier, bypassed the chaotic construction site security and handed the envelope directly to Damon's personal assistant, citing an urgent confidential delivery for Mr. Damon's eyes only. I was not there to witness the exact moment Damon opened the envelope, but my security team had tapped into the site's external camera feeds. I watched the grainy footage on my laptop, sipping green tea in my penthouse. I saw Damon step away from a screaming match with a foreman. He stood by his luxury SUV, tore open the envelope, and began to read. The physical transformation was immediate and chilling. Damon did not yell. He did not throw the papers. He went entirely, terrifyingly still. The imposing, aggressive developer vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating predator. He stared at the documents for a long, agonizing minute. He then carefully placed the papers back into the envelope, slid it into his briefcase, and calmly walked back into the crisis meeting. I knew exactly what was happening in his mind. the financial bleeding, the sudden unexplained cash shortages. Naomi's increasing anxiety, it all suddenly crystallized into a horrifying, coherent picture. The financial betrayal was enough to enrage him, but the timeline discrepancy regarding his son was the nuclear trigger. Damon's entire identity was built on dominance and legacy. The implication that he was raising another man's child, or worse, that he was funding the lifestyle of the man sleeping with his wife, was an insult that demanded absolute annihilation. Damon did not confront Naomi that evening. I knew he wouldn't. He was a man who built skyscrapers. He understood the necessity of structural integrity. He would not act on anonymous documents alone. He would verify. He would launch his own quiet, ruthless investigation. Over the next 2 weeks, my surveillance team monitored the fallout. Damon hired his own elite private investigators. They shadowed Naomi, documenting her panicked, increasingly frequent meetings with Logan at obscure coffee shops as Logan's financial crisis deepened. Damon's accountants tore through his corporate ledgers, uncovering the full staggering extent of Naomi's embezzlement. The paranoia I had seeded in the hospital lobby was now fully blooming in Damon's mind. He began requesting medical records under the guise of updating life insurance policies. He subtly questioned Naomi about the early stages of her pregnancy, watching her stumble and contradict her own timeline. The tension in their household became toxic. Naomi, already terrified by my threats at the charity luncheon, was now suffocating under Damon's sudden, chilling scrutiny. She tried to compensate by acting excessively devoted, but Damon saw right through the performance. He was a man watching a ghost, silently gathering the ammunition he needed to blow her entire world apart. Meanwhile, Logan was completely oblivious to the impending explosion. He was entirely consumed by the toxic asset portfolio he had foolishly acquired from me. His firm was bleeding out at an accelerated rate, the hidden liabilities dragging his quarterly projections into the abyss. He was frantically trying to restructure the debt, utterly unaware that Damon's investigators were documenting his every move, his every secret meeting with Naomi, and his rapid financial descent. The board was perfectly set. The major players were all locked into their predetermined trajectories, hurtling toward a massive, unavoidable collision. The only thing left was to provide the arena where the destruction could be witnessed by everyone who mattered. It was time for the Chicago Elite Charity Gala. The Chicago Elite Charity Gala was the absolute pinnacle of the city's high society calendar. Held in the historic gilded ballroom of a legendary downtown hotel, it was a gathering specifically designed for billionaires to flaunt their wealth while pretending to care about philanthropy. Beneath the towering crystal chandeliers and massive arrangements of white orchids, fortunes were made, reputations were destroyed, and the true hierarchy of the financial district was ruthlessly established. Tonight, the ballroom was packed with 500 of the most powerful corporate predators in the Midwest, and I was the reigning queen of the room. I stood near the grand staircase wearing a custom-tailored crimson gown that commanded immediate attention. Photographers flashed their cameras as I conversed with a circle of top-tier venture capitalists. 3 years ago, I was a discarded weeping woman signing away her assets on a kitchen counter. Tonight, I was the highly anticipated keynote speaker, the founder of the most aggressive marketing and consulting firm in the city. The men surrounding me hung on my every word, eager to secure my favor. I sipped my champagne, my outward demeanor radiating flawless grace, while my internal focus remained completely locked on the heavy oak doors at the entrance. Right on cue, Logan made his entrance. He did not just walk into the ballroom, he paraded into it. He was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, his chest puffed out with blinding, unwarranted arrogance. He looked around the room with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had just conquered the entire financial world. He had spent the last 72 hours decrypting the toxic asset portfolio I had handed him, entirely convinced that the massive debts hidden inside were simply aggressive leverage opportunities. In his delusional mind, he had secured a multi-million-dollar insider deal that would elevate his failing wealth management firm into a global powerhouse. He thought he was the smartest person in Chicago. A few moments later, Damon and Naomi arrived. The contrast between them was glaringly obvious to anyone who knew how to look. Damon looked immaculate and terrifyingly composed. His imposing frame was draped in a tailored black tuxedo, his posture projecting absolute dominance. Naomi was clinging to his arm, dripping in diamonds, and wearing a severely overpriced designer gown. She was trying desperately to play the role of the carefree, affluent wife, but her performance was crumbling. Her eyes were darting frantically around the room, full of raw, unfiltered panic. She was terrified of Damon discovering her embezzlement, terrified of Logan blowing their cover, and completely terrified of me. The tension in the ballroom was a physical weight. All the key players were finally locked inside the same opulent cage. Logan spotted me from across the room. He grabbed a glass of bourbon from a passing waiter and marched directly toward my circle of investors. He did not care about social etiquette. His ego was too inflated by his recent supposed victory. He pushed his way through the crowd, stopping right in front of me with a triumphant, sickening smirk. "Clara, you look absolutely stunning tonight," Logan said, his voice booming loud enough for the surrounding executives to hear. He raised his glass toward me in a mock toast. "I just wanted to personally thank you for the introduction to your partners. We finalized the integration of that portfolio this afternoon. It is easily the most brilliant acquisition my firm has ever executed. We are projecting a massive, unprecedented yield by the end of the quarter." I smiled warmly, masking the lethal intent boiling just beneath my skin. "I am so glad to hear that, Logan. I told you it was a unique opportunity. It takes a very specific kind of man to aggressively assume that much risk. I knew you were the only one arrogant enough to sign those binding agreements without hesitation." Logan chuckled, completely missing the insult buried in my compliment. "Fortune favors the bold, Clara. You just handed me the keys to the kingdom. I will be sure to publicly mention your little marketing agency when the press release goes out. It is the least I can do for my ex-wife." He took a smug sip of his bourbon, his eyes shifting away from me to scan the room. I watched his gaze land on Naomi. Across the ballroom, Naomi was standing beside Damon. She caught Logan looking at her. For a split second, a secret, arrogant look passed between the two lovers. Logan gave her a microscopic, confident nod, silently assuring her that he had secured the money and saved their future. Naomi offered a weak, trembling smile in return before quickly looking away. They both thought they were so incredibly subtle. But Damon saw it. I was watching Damon's reflection in the mirrored pillar next to me. He did not react. He did not turn his head or clench his jaw. He simply watched his wife and her lover exchange their secret signal with the cold, dead eyes of an executioner. Damon had thoroughly reviewed the anonymous financial dossier I had sent him. He had spent the last 2 weeks quietly verifying every single detail of Naomi's betrayal. He knew exactly what was happening, and he was currently playing his part with terrifying perfection. The heavy chimes of the ballroom bells rang out, signaling the guests to take their seats for the dinner service. The crowd began to slowly migrate toward the massive, beautifully decorated tables. The room buzzed with the sound of clinking crystal and hushed, wealthy gossip. I excused myself from Logan, leaving him to bathe in his own manufactured glory. I walked to the head table situated directly in front of the grand stage. I took my seat, placing my silk napkin on my lap, my heart beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. Logan took his seat at a prominent table near the center of the room, loudly ordering another round of expensive drinks for the executive sitting next to him. Damon and Naomi were seated 2 tables away from him. The physical proximity was suffocating. Naomi looked like she was about to pass out, her hands shaking as she reached for her water glass. The lights in the grand ballroom slowly dimmed, casting a dramatic, theatrical glow over the crowd. The master of ceremonies, a prominent local news anchor, stepped up to the podium on the stage. He tapped the microphone, drawing the attention of the 500 billionaires and socialites in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Tonight we are here to celebrate innovation, accountability, and the lasting legacies we build in this great city. To lead us into this evening of philanthropy, we have a very special keynote speaker. She is a visionary entrepreneur, a fierce corporate strategist, and a woman who truly understands the absolute value of securing the future. Please welcome to the stage Clara. The room erupted in polite, enthusiastic applause. I stood up from my chair. I smoothed the front of my crimson gown. I looked directly at Logan, who was clapping slowly with that insufferable, condescending smirk on his face. He thought I was going up there to deliver a standard, boring charity speech. He thought his financial empire was secure. He thought his secret son was waiting for him at home. I walked up the carpeted stairs to the stage. I stepped behind the glass podium and looked out over the sea of expectant faces. The trap was fully loaded. The audience was perfectly captive. I adjusted the microphone, taking a deep, steady breath. It was time to strike the match and burn Logan's entire world to the ground. I stepped up to the podium, the glass cool beneath my hands. The microphone hummed slightly as I adjusted it. The ballroom fell silent, the collective attention of Chicago's elite focused entirely on me. I looked out over the crowd, my gaze sweeping past the faces of politicians, CEOs, and socialites, until it landed squarely on Logan. He was leaning back in his chair, swirling his bourbon, a look of profound, unwarranted satisfaction on his face. Naomi sat rigidly beside Damon, her eyes darting nervously toward me. Damon was a statue, completely still, watching the stage with intense, terrifying focus. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice clear and resonant, carrying effortlessly through the massive ballroom. Thank you all for being here tonight. We gather to celebrate not just the wealth we generate, but the legacies we choose to leave behind. I paused, letting the word legacies hang in the air. I saw Logan nod slightly, completely misinterpreting my meaning. He thought I was validating his archaic obsession with bloodlines and heirs. He had absolutely no idea. In the world of high finance and aggressive venture capital, I continued, pacing my words deliberately. We often speak of risk and reward. We talk about leveraging assets, outsmarting the market, and securing our futures. But tonight, I want to talk about something far more critical. I want to talk about accountability. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the standard self-congratulatory speech they were expecting. I could see the confusion flickering in the eyes of the hedge fund managers sitting near the front. True legacy, I said, my voice hardening, is not built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies. It is not secured by manipulating those closest to you or by purchasing fraudulent realities to protect a fragile ego. I looked directly at Naomi. She visibly flinched. True legacy, I continued, is the unavoidable consequence of our actions. It is the undeniable truth that eventually every single debt must be paid. Every hidden liability is ultimately exposed, and those who believe they can outsmart the inevitable are the ones who fall the hardest. Logan's smug smile began to slip. He shifted in his seat, the first faint hint of uncertainty crossing his features. He was arrogant, but he was not entirely stupid. He sensed the shifting tone, the subtle, sharp edges hidden within my words. This evening, I announced, shifting my tone back to a polished, professional cadence, we have the opportunity to witness the birth of a new legacy. My firm recently facilitated a highly complex, aggressive acquisition for a prominent wealth management group here in Chicago. It is a venture that requires exceptional bravery or perhaps exceptional blindness. I gestured toward the center of the room. I would like to invite the architect of this incredible acquisition to the stage, a man who has risked absolutely everything on a single decisive move. Please welcome Logan. The ballroom erupted in polite, measured applause. Logan stood up, his momentary uncertainty vanishing, instantly replaced by his insatiable need for public recognition. He buttoned his tuxedo jacket, projecting the image of a victorious titan, and began making his way toward the stage. He believed I was honoring our agreement. He believed I was publicly validating his brilliance and securing his reputation among the elite. He climbed the stairs to the stage, flashing a triumphant smile to the crowd. He approached the podium, reaching out to shake my hand. I extended my hand, my grip firm and cold. "Congratulations, Logan," I said quietly, a terrifying smile playing on my lips. "You really earned this." He stepped up to the microphone, his chest puffed out. "Thank you, Clara," he boomed, his voice echoing through the ballroom. "It is an honor to be recognized among such esteemed peers. This acquisition is a testament to the aggressive forward-thinking strategy my firm employs. We are not afraid to take risks, and we are certainly not afraid to redefine the market. He looked out at the audience, soaking in the attention, completely oblivious to the executioner standing right beside him. Redefining the market is exactly right, I said, stepping back up to the microphone. Because the portfolio Logan has so boldly acquired is truly unlike anything else currently circulating in the financial sector. I signaled the AV team located in the balcony at the back of the room. Let us take a closer look at the extraordinary assets Logan has integrated into his firm, I announced. The massive high-definition screens behind us flared to life. The ambient lighting in the ballroom dimmed further, ensuring every eye was fixed on the data illuminating the stage. The first slide appeared. It was not a celebratory graphic. It was a stark, brutal financial schematic. It detailed the core holdings of the encrypted portfolio Logan had purchased. As you can see, I explained, my voice echoing clearly over the sudden shocked silence of the crowd. The primary assets in this package consist of severely distressed commercial real estate ventures and highly volatile tech startups. Logan stared at the screen, his face draining of color. He turned to me, his eyes wide with sudden blinding panic. "Clara, what are you doing?" he hissed, stepping away from the microphone. "This is highly confidential." "I am celebrating your bravery, Logan," I replied smoothly, ignoring his panic and turning back to the audience. I clicked to the next slide. This one was infinitely more devastating. It displayed the hidden liabilities buried within the portfolio's architecture. "What makes this acquisition truly remarkable," I continued, "is the aggressive assumption of risk. Along with these assets, Logan's firm has legally absorbed over $40 million in pending union lawsuits, massive environmental compliance violations, and toxic debt structures that were actively being investigated by federal regulators." The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. The polite murmurs erupted into loud, frantic whispers. The hedge fund managers and venture capitalists were staring at the screens in sheer disbelief. In their world, acquiring that level of toxic liability without massive structured protections was not bold. It was financial suicide. Logan lunged toward the podium, desperately trying to cover the microphone. "Turn it off," he demanded, his voice cracking with terror. "Turn those screens off right now." I stepped back effortlessly, leaving him scrambling. "Why Logan?" I asked, my voice amplified clearly through the sound system. "Are you not proud of your strategic vision? You signed the binding non-disclosure and liability assumption agreements. Your firm decrypted the files this afternoon. The legal transfer is absolute and irreversible." I clicked to the third slide. It was a copy of the signature page from the contract he had signed in my office, his flamboyant signature magnified for all to see. "By executing this agreement," I announced to the horrified crowd, "Logan's wealth management firm is now solely legally responsible for immediate debt restructuring. Given the catastrophic nature of these liabilities, I believe his firm is currently facing an immediate liquidity crisis that far exceeds their total valuation." Logan staggered backward, grabbing the edge of the podium to support his weight. He looked at the screens, then at the audience, then finally at me. The arrogant, untouchable titan was gone. He was a terrified, ruined man, stripped bare in front of the entire city. "You set me up," he gasped, his breath hitching. "You destroyed my firm." "I did not destroy anything, Logan," I replied, my voice dropping to a glacial whisper. "You destroyed yourself. You were too arrogant to perform due diligence. You were too greedy to question a golden opportunity. You signed the papers. I simply handed you the pen." I turned away from him and faced the audience once more. The financial execution was complete. Logan was professionally annihilated. But the evening was far from over. I had dismantled his ego and his wealth. Now it was time to dismantle his legacy. As we discuss accountability and the consequences of aggressive risk, I said, my voice ringing clear across the stunned ballroom, we must also address the concept of legacy. We build empires to leave something behind. But what happens when the very foundation of that legacy is built on a devastating, deliberate lie? I clicked a hidden button on the small remote in my hand. The financial data vanished from the massive screens behind us. The ballroom went dark for a fraction of a second before a new image illuminated the stage. It was the stark, undeniable proof that would shatter Logan's reality forever. The image projected across the massive high-definition screens was not a photograph. It was a stark, heavily redacted federal document. The unmistakable, imposing gold seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission sat squarely at the top. Beneath it was a formal notice of investigation, and at the bottom, highlighted in bright red, were the exact names of the shell companies Logan had just eagerly absorbed into his firm. "What you see behind me," I said, my voice cutting through the suffocating silence of the ballroom like a surgical scalpel, is the reality of aggressive market repositioning. Logan turned around, his eyes locking onto the massive screens. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. He staggered forward, grabbing the microphone mounted on the podium. The sudden, violent movement caused a harsh screech of audio feedback to echo through the expansive room, making several elite guests wince and cover their ears. "You set me up!" Logan shouted into the live microphone, his voice cracking with absolute unfiltered terror. His panic was now amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system washing over the 500 billionaires, politicians, and socialites staring up at him. "This is illegal. You handed me fraudulent assets. I will sue you. I will sue your entire venture capital group." I did not step back. I stood my ground, projecting an aura of total, unbreakable authority. Everything was fully disclosed in the encrypted data room. I replied calmly into my own microphone. "A data room your firm accessed at exactly 2:14 this afternoon. You waived your right to a cooling-off period. You waived your right to an independent legal review. You wanted to be the alpha in the room, Logan. You demanded to close the deal before anyone else could snatch your supposed prize. You signed the documents enthusiastically." I clicked the remote, changing the slide to a magnified view of the SEC subpoena. "The tech startups you acquired are currently the subject of a massive multi-state federal probe for wire fraud and phantom revenue generation," I announced to the silent crowd. "The commercial real estate debt attached to those startups is tied directly to funds embezzled from federal grants. By signing that liability assumption agreement and decrypting that drive, you did not just buy bad debt. You bought federal indictments. You bought the full, unyielding attention of the SEC." Logan gripped the edges of the podium so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his bespoke tuxedo jacket. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping into a desperate, pleading register that completely shattered his arrogant facade. "I will void the contract," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead and shining under the harsh stage lights. "I will claim coercion. I will tell the courts you manipulated a personal relationship to trap me. You cannot void a contract you enthusiastically signed in front of my entire legal team." I shot back, my tone ruthless and exact. "You signed it completely unprompted while loudly bragging about your firm's infrastructure and your aggressive acquisition strategies. You claimed you were a titan who understood risk. Now you get to own the consequences." The ballroom was entirely captivated by the live execution taking place on stage. In the world of high finance, weakness is highly contagious. I looked out at the tables near the front. The executives Logan had been drinking with just 10 minutes ago were now physically leaning away from his empty chair. Some of them were already pulling out their phones, frantically typing messages under the tables, instructing their teams to sever all financial ties with Logan's wealth management firm before the market opened. "Let us discuss the mathematics of your bravery, Logan," I continued, showing absolutely no mercy. "The immediate federal fines attached to your new portfolio exceed your firm's total operating capital by roughly 40%. When the market opens tomorrow morning, your creditors will see the SEC filing. They will immediately call in your heavily leveraged loans. Your firm is completely undeniably bankrupt. You do not have the liquidity to survive the week, let alone fund a massive federal defense." Logan's phone began to vibrate violently inside his tuxedo jacket. The buzzing sound was audible over the live microphone. Then a second phone rang at a nearby table. Then a third. News of the SEC investigation was breaking in real time, hitting the financial wires. Logan's board members and junior partners were discovering that their firm was doomed, and they were desperately trying to reach him. He pulled his phone from his pocket with a shaking hand, staring at the barrage of incoming crisis alerts. The reality of his absolute ruin finally crushed the last remaining pillars of his ego. He dropped the phone. It clattered against the stage floor. I turned my attention to the captivated audience, transforming Logan into a living cautionary tale. "Ladies and gentlemen, look closely at the man standing on this stage," I said, commanding the entire room. "This is what happens when ego outpaces diligence. This is what happens when a man builds his entire identity on the illusion of dominance while neglecting the structural integrity of his own foundation." Logan believed he could outsmart the market. He believed he could treat people as disposable assets and face zero consequences. He was wrong. Across the ballroom, Naomi was sitting frozen in her chair. Her eyes were wide with sheer terror. She was watching her wealthy, powerful lover being publicly dismantled, reduced to a trembling, bankrupt shell of a man. She knew that without Logan's money, her safety net was entirely gone. Damon sat beside her, perfectly composed, observing the destruction with the cold, calculating eyes of a predator watching a rival bleed out. I turned back to Logan. He was staring at me, his eyes hollow and defeated. The man who had mocked my supposed infertility in a hospital lobby just days ago was gone. In his place was a pathetic, ruined fraud. "Congratulations on your historic acquisition, Logan," I whispered, my voice carrying a lethal final chill. "You wanted a legacy. You just secured one. You will be remembered as the man who proudly signed away his entire empire because he was too arrogant to read the fine print." I stepped away from the podium, leaving him standing there under the glaring stage lights, completely isolated and utterly destroyed. But the night was not over. The financial execution had merely prepared the ground. It was time to deliver the final fatal blow to his personal reality. I did not leave the stage. I simply allowed Logan a few agonizing seconds to suffocate under the immense gravity of his shattered corporate empire. He stood frozen at the podium, staring blankly at his dropped phone, his breath hitching in ragged, erratic gasps. The wealthy elite in the audience watched him bleed out financially, their faces reflecting a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. But financial ruin was merely the appetizer. The main course was about to be served. I stepped back up to the microphone. The sharp click of my heels against the polished wooden floorboard snapped Logan out of his trance. He turned his head slowly, looking at me with bloodshot, terrified eyes. He had nothing left to lose in the financial sector, but his massive, fragile ego still desperately clung to his personal life. "We have spent a great deal of time tonight discussing corporate assets," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the expansive ballroom. "But in the circles of immense wealth, corporate assets are only half of the equation. We must also discuss the ultimate asset. We must discuss family legacy." Logan stiffened. He puffed out his chest, attempting to summon his remaining pride. "My family is none of your business, Clara," he rasped into his live microphone, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "You took my company. Leave my son out of this." I smiled. It was a slow, predatory expression that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "I am glad you brought up your son, Logan. Because in the world of trust funds, wealth management, and dynastic inheritance, a biological heir is the ultimate currency. An heir unlocks principal accounts. An heir secures power. An heir proves to the world that a man is truly a man." I turned my gaze toward the audience, locking eyes with the billionaires sitting in the front rows. Many men in this room understand the crushing pressure to produce a biological legacy. I continued smoothly. 3 years ago, my ex-husband sat me down at our kitchen island and handed me medical documents diagnosing me with premature ovarian failure. He looked me directly in the eye and told me I was entirely useless. He told me I was a broken, barren woman holding back his glorious destiny. He demanded an immediate divorce so he could secure his precious bloodline with another woman. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. I had never spoken publicly about the details of my divorce. The sheer cruelty of Logan's actions was now exposed to his colleagues, his investors, and his remaining social circle. But there is a fatal flaw in building an empire on a medical lie, I announced, raising my hand toward the balcony. I signaled the AV team. The massive high-definition screens behind us flickered. The federal subpoena vanished instantly, replaced by a stark, heavily magnified medical document. The crisp white background and bold black text illuminated the stage. It was not my medical record. It was the unredacted certified diagnostic report from the Chicago Elite Fertility Institute. I want everyone to direct their attention to the screens. I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. This is a certified medical evaluation belonging to Logan. If you look closely at the diagnostic codes highlighted in red, you will not find female infertility. You will find a diagnosis of severe, irreversible, non-obstructive azoospermia, total genetic male sterility. The ballroom erupted into a deafening wave of shocked whispers. Hundreds of wealthy elites were openly staring at Logan, their eyes wide with disbelief and poorly concealed amusement. Logan stepped back from the podium, shaking his head frantically. "That is a lie," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the massive screens. "Those documents are forged. I have a son. I have a 1-year-old biological son. Naomi gave me a son." I let his desperate, pathetic denial hang in the air for a moment. He was clinging to the very lie that was about to destroy him. "You paid a corrupt clinic director a massive bribe to forge my medical records," I stated clearly, ensuring the microphones picked up every single syllable. "You completely destroyed my mental health to hide your own genetic inadequacy. You were so terrified of your peers discovering you were sterile that you happily ruined my life to protect your fragile pride. And then you fell right into the ultimate trap." I clicked the small remote in my hand. The screens behind us shifted again. The medical records disappeared, replaced by a crisp, undeniable forensic laboratory report from a highly accredited facility in Switzerland. The data was beautifully formatted, the complex genetic markers stripped away, to reveal a stark, brutal percentage. "Logan," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register, "you were so utterly obsessed with projecting the image of a dominant alpha male that you never bothered to ask the most basic logical questions about your miraculous child. You simply handed over your credit cards, bought a massive new estate, and happily funded the life of a woman who saw you coming from a mile away." I pointed to the massive screen behind me. "Look at the probability of paternity, Logan. Look at the numbers." Logan turned his head slowly. He stared up at the massive projection. The bold, black numbers stared back at him, completely unfeeling and utterly absolute. Probability of paternity regarding subject A, Logan, 0%. He let out a strangled, breathless sound. It was not a scream. It was the sound of a man's entire reality cracking straight down the middle. He grabbed his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. "Your son has zero biological connection to you," I announced to the captivated, horrified ballroom. "You are not a father. You are a biological dead end. You are a complete, sterile, bankrupt fraud. Every single one of your pathetic lies has finally caught up with you, and your false empire is completely destroyed." Logan remained frozen at the podium. His hands gripped the edges of the clear acrylic so tightly that his knuckles looked like polished bone. His chest heaved in violent, irregular spasms. He was hyperventilating, his eyes locked onto the massive screen above him. The 0% probability glared back at him in unforgiving red ink. The ultimate alpha male of the Chicago financial district was currently suffocating under the weight of his own profound genetic inadequacy. Across the silent ballroom, the scraping of a chair violently pushed back broke the tension. Naomi had hit her absolute breaking point. She realized the full extent of the catastrophe. Her embezzlement was known. Her infidelity was known. Her child's true parentage was broadcast to 500 billionaires. She hiked up the skirt of her overpriced designer gown and bolted. She abandoned her table, scrambling desperately toward the heavy oak doors at the grand entrance. She wanted to escape the room, the city, and the devastating consequences of her own horrific choices. She was 10 feet away from freedom when the shadows near the exit simply shifted and solidified. Damon stepped directly into her path. He moved with the terrifying silent grace of a seasoned apex predator. His tailored black tuxedo seemed to absorb the light around him. He did not raise his hands. He did not shout. He simply stood there, an immovable, towering wall of muscle and absolute authority. Naomi slammed to a halt, her expensive heels skidding on the polished floor. She looked up at her husband, her face completely devoid of color. She opened her mouth, a pathetic whimper escaping her throat. She tried to step around him, but Damon smoothly shifted his weight, closing off the exit entirely. He looked down at her with eyes so cold and devoid of affection that she physically recoiled. He did not say a single word to her. He simply pointed his finger toward a chair near the wall, issuing a silent, undeniable command. Naomi collapsed into the seat, burying her face in her trembling hands, entirely defeated. Damon turned his attention away from his ruined wife and faced the stage. A nearby audio technician, sensing the gravity of the moment, quickly handed him a wireless microphone. Damon took it without breaking his stride. He began walking down the center aisle of the ballroom. The sea of elite guests parted instantly, giving him a wide berth. The silence in the room was absolute. Everyone recognized the sheer lethal power radiating from him. He ascended the carpeted stairs to the stage with slow, measured steps. I stepped back, giving Damon the floor. He walked over to Logan, stopping just a few feet away. Logan looked up, his eyes wild and unfocused. He looked like a cornered animal facing certain death. Damon raised the microphone. His voice was incredibly calm, possessing a deep, resonant quality that echoed powerfully through the massive space. "You look terribly pale, Logan," Damon said, his tone conversational and utterly relaxed. "Breathe. You are going to pass out in front of your entire professional network, and we cannot have that. We have some important family matters to discuss." Logan swallowed hard, his vocal cords barely functioning. "Damon, I did not know. I swear to you, I thought the boy was mine. Naomi lied to both of us." Damon chuckled softly. It was a dark, highly amused sound that sent shivers down the spines of everyone watching. "You think you are a victim here, Logan? You think my wife manipulated you into a tragic misunderstanding? You think you stole something from me when you invited her into your luxury penthouse?" Damon took a deliberate step closer. "Let me correct your highly flawed perspective. You did not steal my wife. You simply borrowed a woman I was already preparing to discard. And you did not trick me into raising your child. I tricked you into funding mine." The ballroom collectively held its breath. Logan stared at him, his mind completely incapable of processing the psychological warfare he was experiencing. Did you honestly believe a man who builds skyscrapers from the ground up would fail to notice a missing $250,000 from his secondary corporate accounts? Damon asked, his voice dripping with pure, refined condescension. "I knew about the embezzlement the week it started. I knew about your pathetic secret hotel meetings. I knew you were desperately trying to secure a biological heir to satisfy your trust fund requirements. And when Naomi got pregnant, I knew exactly whose blood was running through that child's veins." Logan shook his head weakly. "If you knew, why did you let it happen? Why did you let me claim him?" "Because raising a child in your hyperinflated tax bracket is exceptionally expensive," Damon replied smoothly. "I watched you purchase a massive new estate specifically to house my son. I watched you set up premium educational trusts. I watched you pay for exorbitant medical bills, luxury pediatric care, and designer clothes. I watched you funnel hundreds of thousands of dollars into ensuring my biological child lived like absolute royalty. You happily drained your own fragile resources to finance my legacy." I stood a few feet away watching this masterful execution unfold. Damon was operating with the exact same ruthless precision I had utilized in the boardroom. We had not coordinated this specific confrontation, but our distinct brands of vengeance aligned perfectly. He was completely dismantling the last remaining pillar of Logan's fragile masculinity. The wealthy socialites and venture capitalists sitting in the audience were absolutely mesmerized. They were witnessing the total psychological destruction of a man who had built his entire career on the illusion of superiority. Damon smiled a terrifying, triumphant expression. You wanted to be an alpha male, Logan. You wanted to prove your dominance to the financial district. But in reality, you were just my unwitting, unpaid sponsor. You worked yourself into federal bankruptcy to pay for my son's lifestyle. You assumed the financial burden, and I get to walk away with the child fully funded while you lose your company, your reputation, and your mind. Damon lowered the microphone slightly, letting his final devastating words hang in the heavy air of the ballroom. Logan dropped to his knees right there on the stage. His legs could no longer support the crushing, suffocating weight of his complete and absolute failure. He stared blankly at the polished wooden floorboards, a broken, bankrupt shell of a man who had ultimately financed his own magnificent destruction. Logan remained on his knees, his expensive tuxedo pants pressing into the polished wood of the stage. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by the ragged, desperate sounds of his breathing. 500 of Chicago's most powerful elite watched a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of supremacy completely disintegrate. Damon looked down at him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He paced slowly around Logan, delivering his final lethal strikes with the precision of a seasoned predator. You thought you were a master strategist, Logan, Damon said, his voice echoing cleanly through the microphone. You thought you could purchase a legacy just like you purchased fraudulent medical records. But you failed to understand the most basic rule of real estate and finance. You never build a towering structure on stolen land. I knew about your genetic deficiency the moment my private investigators hacked Naomi's hidden email account 6 months ago. I saw the lengths you went to in order to secure an heir. Damon stopped pacing and stood directly in front of the kneeling man. I orchestrated the entire timeline of my wife's supposed exit. I made sure she felt neglected just enough to run to your penthouse. I made sure she carried my child into your meticulously decorated nursery. I allowed you to cover the exorbitant delivery costs at the private hospital. I smiled when I saw the bank statements showing you had established a $5 million educational trust for a boy who will proudly carry my last name. You did all the heavy lifting, Logan. You furnished the castle, and now I am simply changing the locks. Logan shook his head, a pathetic, broken gesture. His hands grasped at the empty air. My firm. He choked out his voice, barely a whisper. My money. You took everything. I took nothing. I interjected, stepping smoothly back toward the center of the stage. We simply held up a mirror and allowed you to destroy yourself. You were so blinded by your pathological need to dominate women that you never noticed the two people you underestimated were actively dismantling your entire universe. Down on the main floor, the reality of the situation finally shattered Naomi's paralysis. She pushed herself up from the chair where Damon had commanded her to sit. Her designer gown rustled loudly as she stumbled toward the stage, her face streaked with ruined makeup and tears. She bypassed Damon entirely, throwing herself toward the edge of the stage where Logan knelt. Logan, please, Naomi begged, her voice high and shrill, cracking with absolute terror. We can fix this. We can fight them. We still have each other. We can start over. Logan slowly lifted his head. He looked at the woman he had destroyed my marriage for. He looked at the woman who had handed him another man's child and convinced him it was his ultimate prize. The sheer blinding hatred that washed over his face was terrifying. Get away from me, Logan snarled, his voice guttural and raw. He scrambled backward, repulsed by her very presence. You parasitic liar. You ruined me. You handed me a bastard child and let me parade him around my firm. You are the reason I am bankrupt. You are the reason I am facing a federal indictment. I have absolutely nothing left, and it is entirely your fault. Do not ever speak to me again. Naomi recoiled as if he had struck her physically. The wealthy attendees in the front rows watched with profound disgust as the two lovers violently turned on each other the moment their fraudulent wealth evaporated. Naomi turned her desperate, frantic eyes toward Damon. She clawed at the edge of the stage, looking up at the imposing man she had legally married and systematically betrayed. Damon, she sobbed, her voice echoing through the silent ballroom without the aid of a microphone. Damon, I am so sorry. He manipulated me. He promised me the world. Please, you have to protect me. I am your wife. I am the mother of your son." Damon looked down at her. His expression contained absolutely zero mercy. "You were my wife, Naomi," Damon corrected smoothly, his voice radiating a chilling calm. "As of 2 hours ago, my legal team filed the divorce petition in Cook County Court. We also filed an emergency injunction for sole physical and legal custody of my son, backed by the undeniable DNA evidence Clara so graciously provided." Naomi let out a sharp, devastated wail, collapsing against the stage. "Let me remind you of the ironclad prenuptial agreement you eagerly signed when you thought you were securing my real estate fortune?" Damon continued, speaking directly into the microphone so the entire room could hear the terms of her execution. Section 4, Paragraph 2, explicitly dictates that in the event of documented infidelity, you forfeit all rights to alimony, spousal support, and division of property. You walk away with exactly what you brought into our marriage: nothing. Damon crouched down slightly, ensuring his gaze locked directly with hers. "You tried to play two powerful men against each other to fund your extravagant hollow lifestyle. Now Logan is bankrupt and facing federal prison. I am retaining full custody of my son and securing my assets. You have no money, no home, no husband, and no child. You are completely and utterly discarded." Naomi collapsed onto the floor, curling into a tight, weeping ball of sheer devastation. The socialites she had desperately tried to impress earlier in the evening were now openly whispering, their faces twisted in absolute judgment. She had sacrificed every ounce of her dignity for a taste of the elite lifestyle, and now she was being permanently exiled from it in the most humiliating way imaginable. Damon stood up. He handed the microphone back to me with a polite, respectful nod. He then turned his back on his weeping wife and the broken man kneeling on the stage. He walked down the stairs and strode confidently out of the ballroom, his pride intact, his victory absolute. I stood at the podium looking down at the wreckage of the two people who had once promised to love and protect me. Logan was curled inward, his hands covering his face, a completely ruined shell of the arrogant corporate predator he had been just 20 minutes prior. He realized with crushing, inescapable certainty that he had lost his money, his reputation, his firm, and his entirely fabricated legacy. The high society peers he had spent his entire life trying to impress were now treating him like a highly infectious disease. The venture capitalists he had sought to dominate were actively texting their legal teams to ensure they had zero financial exposure to his sinking ship. I looked out at the massive crowd. The silence was heavy, profound, and filled with a terrifying new respect. They had gathered tonight to celebrate charity, but they had instead witnessed a flawless surgical masterclass in corporate and personal vengeance. Accountability is rarely a comfortable process. I said into the microphone, my voice steady, closing out the most spectacular keynote speech in Chicago history. But it is always necessary. Thank you all for your time, your generous donations to tonight's cause, and your unwavering attention. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. I turned off the microphone. I did not spare a single downward glance at Logan or Naomi. I turned my back on them, my crimson gown sweeping elegantly across the wooden stage, and walked toward the stairs, stepping smoothly into a brilliant, unburdened future. The morning after the Chicago Elite Charity Gala did not bring a quiet sunrise. It brought an absolute catastrophic hurricane to the financial district. I stood on the balcony of my penthouse sipping black coffee, watching the news helicopters circle the gleaming glass tower that housed Logan's wealth management firm. The dominoes I had tipped over on that stage were now crashing down with terrifying, exponential speed. I watched the morning news with deep satisfaction. By 8 in the morning, the Securities and Exchange Commission had secured federal warrants. Agents in dark windbreakers flooded Logan's corporate lobby, seizing hard drives, freezing accounts, and barricading the trading floors. The toxic asset portfolio he had eagerly decrypted less than 24 hours ago acted as a massive beacon guiding federal regulators straight into the rotten core of his empire. The Internal Revenue Service, alerted by the sudden massive debt liability, and the highly suspicious shell companies woven into his new acquisitions, launched an immediate, devastating audit. Logan was entirely trapped. His junior partners and board members, the same men who had enthusiastically toasted his brilliance the day before, instantly turned into rabid animals. Desperate to save their own careers and avoid federal prison, they sprinted to the authorities, willingly turning state's evidence against him. They testified that Logan had bypassed all standard compliance protocols to force the acquisition through. By noon, his firm's massive line of credit was completely revoked by every major bank in the city. His stock valuation plummeted to fractions of a penny. He was unceremoniously stripped of his title as senior partner, locked out of his own building, and left facing a mountain of insurmountable corporate debt that he was legally bound to repay personally. His entire legacy was reduced to a stack of federal indictments and sensationalized headlines on financial news networks. While Logan was being buried under the crushing weight of the federal government, Naomi was experiencing her own rapid descent into absolute nothingness. Following her public humiliation at the gala, Naomi had desperately flagged down a taxi, fleeing the hotel in her ruined designer gown. She directed the driver to the sprawling gated estate she shared with Damon, clinging to the pathetic hope that she could somehow manipulate her way back inside. She believed she could pack her expensive jewelry, grab her hidden cash reserves, and formulate a survival plan. She was entirely wrong. When Naomi arrived at the estate, the heavy wrought iron gates refused to open. She frantically swiped her digital access card, but the scanner flashed a harsh, denying red. Damon was a man who built fortresses, and he had permanently sealed the gates the second he left the ballroom. Naomi climbed out of the taxi, shivering in the cool night air, and began pounding her fists against the metal bars. Her hysterical shouting alerted the private security detail stationed on the property. 2 armed guards stepped out of the gatehouse. They did not offer her a coat. They did not show a single ounce of sympathy. They coldly informed Naomi that her access privileges had been permanently revoked by the property owner. When she demanded to see her son, the guards handed her a thick, sealed manila envelope, instructing her to vacate the private road immediately or face arrest for trespassing. The taxi driver, realizing he was not going to get paid by the weeping woman locked outside a mansion, promptly drove away, leaving Naomi stranded on the dark, empty street. Naomi tore open the envelope under the dim light of a street lamp. Inside was a copy of the emergency ex parte order granted by a Cook County family court judge just hours earlier. Damon had executed a flawless, ruthless legal strike. Leveraging his massive wealth, his pristine public reputation, and the undeniable DNA evidence proving Logan was not the father, Damon had easily secured sole physical and legal custody of Lucas. The judge, presented with the detailed financial records of Naomi embezzling funds to subsidize an illicit affair, deemed her a severe flight risk and an unfit guardian. But Damon did not stop at securing his son. He weaponized the strict prenuptial agreement Naomi had so eagerly signed. The contract contained an ironclad infidelity clause designed specifically to protect his real estate empire from opportunistic predators. Because her affair with Logan was now documented, proven, and publicly admitted, the penalty phase of the contract was instantly triggered. Naomi was legally stripped of everything. She was granted absolutely zero alimony. She received zero spousal support. She was entirely barred from accessing any of Damon's property's bank accounts or luxury vehicles. The designer clothes sitting in her massive walk-in closet legally belonged to Damon's holding company. She was left standing on the pavement with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back and a crushing wave of public infamy. She had traded a loyal, decent friend for a taste of stolen luxury, and her ultimate reward was absolute, terrifying poverty. Over the next few days, the financial and social circles of Chicago aggressively purged both Logan and Naomi from their ranks. Naomi attempted to check into a luxury hotel, but all her credit cards previously linked to Damon and Logan were immediately declined. She was forced to beg an estranged, distant relative for bus fare, quietly fleeing the city in disgrace. She had become a total pariah, radioactive to anyone who valued their social standing. Logan spent his days locked inside the Connecticut mansion he had kept in the divorce, ignoring the relentless pounding of process servers and journalists at his front door. He drank heavily, staring at the walls of the estate he had stolen from me, entirely paralyzed by his impending criminal trials. He believed the mansion was his final sanctuary, an untouchable fortress protected by complex real estate laws. He believed that no matter what the federal government took from him, he would always have a roof over his head. He was wrong about that, too. I had not forgotten about the house we bought together. I had not forgotten the exact spot on the kitchen counter where he had handed me those forged medical papers. His financial execution was simply the first phase of my operation. The ultimate reckoning was already approaching his front door, wrapped in layers of brilliant aggressive corporate strategy. Logan sat in the darkened living room of the sprawling Connecticut estate, nursing a glass of cheap whiskey. The imported crystal decanters had been smashed against the stone fireplace 2 nights ago in a fit of impotent, pathetic rage. The power to the house was still on, but only because the utility companies had not yet processed the federal freeze on his accounts. Outside, a heavy, relentless rain pounded against the massive windows, masking the sounds of the aggressive reporters who had finally grown tired of camping at his front gates. He believed he was safe here. He believed the massive iron gates and the thick stone walls provided an impenetrable, unyielding barrier against the complete collapse of his universe. He had orchestrated what he thought was a brilliant legal maneuver just hours before the charity gala. Anticipating a minor liquidity issue, though completely unaware of the incoming federal hurricane, Logan had aggressively transferred the deed of the Connecticut estate into an obscure offshore holding entity. It was a classic, highly unethical wealth preservation tactic designed to shield his primary physical asset from corporate creditors and domestic lawsuits. He thought he had outsmarted the entire financial system. He thought the house was entirely invisible to the auditors. The heavy brass doorbell echoed through the empty mansion, a sharp, commanding sound that made Logan spill whiskey onto his wrinkled, unwashed dress shirt. He froze, his bloodshot eyes darting toward the grand foyer. He expected to see federal agents with badges or ambitious journalists trying to scale the perimeter to get a photograph of his ruin. He grabbed a heavy wooden umbrella from the entryway stand, wielding it like a pathetic blunt weapon, and marched toward the massive front doors. He yanked the heavy mahogany door open, fully prepared to shout obscenities at whoever dared to trespass on his final sanctuary. He did not find reporters. He found me. I stood under the large portico, completely shielded from the driving rain by a massive black umbrella held by one of the 2 imposing private security contractors flanking my sides. I wore a sharply tailored charcoal trench coat, my posture radiating the exact same absolute terrifying control I had wielded on the gala stage. Next to me stood my lead corporate attorney, holding a thick waterproof leather portfolio tightly against his chest. Logan dropped his wooden weapon. It clattered loudly against the stone porch, rolling into a puddle. He stared at me, his jaw slack, his eyes wide with a chaotic mixture of profound confusion and raw bubbling anger. "What are you doing here?" Logan demanded, his voice raspy and severely slurred from days of heavy drinking and screaming at his panicked lawyers over the phone. "You are trespassing. This is private property. Get off my estate before I call the local police and have you all arrested for targeted harassment." I did not flinch. I simply offered him a serene, utterly terrifying smile. "You are more than welcome to call the authorities, Logan," I replied smoothly, my voice cutting cleanly through the sound of the rain. In fact, my team already notified the local precinct of our arrival to ensure a smooth, peaceful transition of property. "I am afraid you are the one who is currently trespassing." Logan let out a harsh, barking laugh, clutching the edge of the doorframe to steady his swaying body. "You are completely delusional, Clara. I own this massive estate. I won this house in our divorce settlement. It belongs entirely to me. You cannot just show up with hired muscle and pretend you have any legal authority here." I stepped forward, invading his space, just enough to make him instinctively lean backward into the foyer. "You do not own anything, Logan." I corrected my tone, dropping to a glacial, razor-sharp whisper. "You transferred the deed of this entire property to a blind holding entity last Thursday. You did it to hide your primary asset from the impending federal audits and your incredibly angry investors. You thought an offshore registry would make the house utterly untouchable. Logan swallowed hard, a flicker of genuine, unadulterated panic crossing his exhausted face. His legal maneuver was supposed to be a highly guarded, bulletproof secret. The fact that I knew about it instantly shattered his remaining fragile sense of security. It does not matter what entity holds the deed, he stammered, attempting to project a hollow confidence he absolutely did not possess. I am the sole managing director of that specific holding company. The property remains under my exclusive permanent control. My attorney stepped forward, smoothly opening the leather portfolio. He extracted a crisp, legally certified document bearing the official undeniable seal of the State Property Registry. He held it up in the dim light, ensuring Logan could clearly read the bold text printed across the official header. That is where your absolute lack of due diligence betrays you again, Logan, I explained, savoring the absolute systematic destruction of his final sanctuary. You were so rushed, so completely desperate to hide your assets, that you transferred the deed to a shell company already carrying massive hidden corporate tax liens. You did not investigate the holding entity. You just bought it off the shelf from a shady broker to serve as a quick, dirty vault. Logan stared at the paper, his breathing becoming incredibly shallow and erratic. My venture capital firm specializes in aggressively acquiring distressed debt. I continued delivering the fatal calculated blow with absolute surgical precision. 2 days ago, while you were weeping over your frozen bank accounts and dodging federal subpoenas, my partners and I aggressively purchased the tax liens attached to your new holding company. We executed a hostile immediate takeover of the shell entity for mere pennies on the dollar. Since the holding company legally owns this estate and my firm legally owns the holding company, the math is delightfully, undeniably simple. I paused, letting the devastating, inescapable reality wash over him completely. I own this house, Logan. I own the marble countertops where you handed me those fake medical records. I own the bedroom where you slept with my former best friend. Every single inch of this property belongs entirely to me. Logan staggered backward, hitting the heavy wooden doorframe with a loud thud. His mind completely fractured as the inescapable, horrific truth crushed him. He looked at the legal documents, then at the security contractors, and finally at me. The arrogant financial titan was completely gone. He was nothing but a broken, destitute squatter standing in the doorway of a castle he had just handed directly to his greatest enemy. "You cannot do this," he whispered, tears of sheer, unfiltered panic welling in his bloodshot eyes. "Clara, please. The federal government seized my accounts. Damon took Naomi and the baby. I have absolutely no money for a hotel. I have no car. If you take the house, I will be out on the street tonight. I will have absolutely nowhere to go." My attorney handed Logan a formal, legally binding eviction notice, pressing it firmly against his chest. "This is a writ of immediate possession," my attorney stated coldly. "You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your personal clothing and vacate the premises. If you refuse to comply, the security team will physically remove you from the property." Logan fell to his knees on the hard stone porch, the freezing rain blowing in and soaking his wrinkled trousers. The man who had mocked my supposed infertility, who had proudly announced my worthlessness to a crowded hospital lobby, was now openly weeping at my feet. He begged me for mercy. He begged me for a second chance. He begged for a single shred of the compassion he had brutally, callously denied me 3 years ago. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely no pity. I felt only the profound, cleansing satisfaction of perfect engineered justice. "Your 10 minutes start right now, Logan," I said, my voice echoing with absolute finality over the sound of the falling rain. "I highly recommend you start packing immediately." I turned my back on him and walked toward my waiting car, leaving him to crawl through the empty halls of his stolen mansion, frantically gathering whatever pathetic scraps of his ruined life he could carry in his bare hands. Exactly 365 days have passed since I stood in the freezing rain of Connecticut and watched a broken, destitute man crawl through the empty halls of a stolen mansion. Tonight, the air is remarkably different. I am standing on the expansive wraparound terrace of my Chicago penthouse. A crisp autumn breeze sweeps off Lake Michigan, carrying the sharp electric energy of the city. Below me, the sprawling metropolis is a brilliant grid of gold and silver lights. It is a city of ambition, a city of predators, and a city I have completely undeniably conquered. I rest my hands against the cool glass railing, inhaling the crisp night air, feeling an absolute profound sense of tranquility. My phone vibrates against the silk fabric of my tailored evening trousers. I slide it out of my pocket. The screen illuminates, displaying a new voicemail from an anonymous restricted number. My upgraded security software instantly bypasses the block displaying the registered name of a cheap prepaid cellular device. I lift the phone to my ear and press play. It is Logan. The voice filtering through the small speaker is completely unrecognizable from the booming, arrogant corporate titan who once humiliated me in a crowded hospital lobby. His tone is raspy, weak, and fractured by wet, pathetic gasps for air. He is weeping. Clara, he begs, his voice cracking violently. Please, I know you hate me. I know I deserve it, but I have absolutely nothing left. He proceeds to narrate his miserable, suffocating reality. He tells me about his tiny, roach-infested motel room on the extreme outskirts of the city. He tells me how the federal prosecutors have completely frozen his public defender, how he is facing a mandatory minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary for massive corporate wire fraud and tax evasion. He cries about the sheer isolating loneliness. He mentions Naomi spitting her name like poison, blaming her for pushing him into the financial abyss, before reminding me that she is currently working a minimum wage shift at a suburban discount store, utterly ignored by Damon, who retains absolute custody of his son. Then comes the inevitable desperate pivot. He tries to invoke our past. He tries to summon the ghost of the woman who used to love him. You were always the smart one, Clara, he sobs, the sheer desperation radiating through the digital connection. You were the only real thing in my life. I was blinded by my ego. I was stupid. Please, I just need a small loan, just enough to hire a decent defense attorney before my sentencing hearing next month. I will pay you back. I will do whatever you want. Please give me a second chance. I listened to the entire message without a single fluctuation in my heart rate. I do not feel a triumphant burning rage. I do not feel a lingering toxic resentment. And I absolutely do not feel a single microscopic drop of pity. I simply feel profound, impenetrable closure. The voicemail reaches its pathetic, weeping conclusion. The automated prompt asks if I would like to save or delete the message. I tap the screen once. Delete. The audio file is instantly wiped from the server. It is purged from my device. The final pathetic echo of Logan is permanently, irrevocably erased from my entire existence. He is a ghost, and I no longer believe in ghosts. I slide the phone back into my pocket and turn away from the city skyline. I step toward the massive floor-to-ceiling glass doors leading into my penthouse. Inside, the space is alive with brilliant, vibrant energy. The rich sounds of jazz and genuine, unfiltered laughter fill the room. This is not a stiff, performative gathering of superficial socialites sizing each other up. This is a private celebration of my chosen family. Gathered around my custom marble kitchen island and lounging on my imported Italian sofas are the brilliant, fiercely loyal executives of my marketing firm. Mixed among them are my top-tier venture capital partners, the sharp, intelligent men and women who stood shoulder to shoulder with me as we aggressively acquired the market. We are celebrating our latest massively successful corporate merger. I slide the glass door open and step inside. The cold wind is instantly shut out, replaced by the warm, inviting atmosphere of absolute success. My lead financial strategist catches my eye and raises a glass of vintage champagne in my direction, offering a silent, respectful toast to our victory. I smile back, a genuine, completely unburdened smile. I walk over to the custom bar and pour myself a glass of crisp, sparkling water. I lean against the counter, surveying the room. 3 years ago, I was a shattered woman sobbing on a cold kitchen floor. I was entirely convinced that my worth was defined by a falsified medical document and the approval of a man who viewed me as a defective, biologically useless asset. I believed that because I could not provide a traditional legacy, My life lacked fundamental value. Society often attempts to dictate the rules for women. We are told our worth is inherently tied to our compliance, our marriages, and our quiet willingness to endure profound disrespect in the name of keeping the peace. We are told to accept the cards we are dealt and walk away with quiet dignity when we are betrayed. But I refuse to play by those archaic, toxic rules. When Logan and Naomi rigged the game against me, I did not just flip the board. I bought the entire casino. I bought the debt. I bought the consequences. I used their own vanity, their own fragile egos, and their own blinding greed to orchestrate their absolute destruction. I learned the most vital lesson a person can ever master. The ultimate revenge is not simply burning your enemies to the ground. The ultimate revenge is redefining your own legacy. It is building a reality so exceptionally brilliant, so flawlessly secure, and so undeniably powerful that the pathetic existence of the people who tried to break you can no longer even cast a shadow on your floor. Logan wanted a biological legacy to validate his fragile masculinity. He ended up with a prison sentence and absolute ruin. I wanted the truth, and in the process of uncovering it, I built an empire. I raised my glass, silently toasting the beautiful, vibrant life thrumming all around me. I am Clara. I am whole. I am a master of the game, and I am completely untouchably free. The most profound lesson to be drawn from these narratives of profound betrayal is that true vindication is never found in immediate retaliation or emotional outbursts. Instead, the ultimate form of justice is reclaiming your own narrative and quietly rebuilding your life on a foundation of unshakable independence. When faced with a coordinated attack on their self-worth, whether abandoned by parents, excluded by siblings, or gaslit by a spouse and a best friend, the protagonists were pushed to the absolute edge of despair. They were stripped of their dignity and discarded. It is a natural human instinct to want to immediately scream the truth, force a confrontation, or beg for validation from those who broke us. Yet this story teaches us that reacting emotionally in the heat of the moment only hands more power over to the abusers. Real strength is cultivated in the silence that follows the storm. By stepping back and channeling agonizing grief into calculated ambition, it becomes possible to redefine your entire existence. The ultimate goal of building a successful independent life is not simply to destroy those who cause the pain. It is to prove to yourself that you are whole, capable, and formidable. When the time finally comes to expose the lies and deceit, you do not have to raise your voice. You simply hold up a mirror and allow their own toxic arrogance, entitlement, and blinding greed to orchestrate their downfall. This narrative reminds us that while we cannot control the cruelty of others, we retain absolute control over how we rise from the ashes they leave behind. True closure arrives the moment you realize your worth was never tied to their conditional validation. If you are currently healing from a betrayal that made you question your value, take that first step today toward building a life so brilliantly your own that the shadows of your past can no longer touch you.